During Thanksgiving dinner, my daughter's father-in-law threw a glass of red wine directly into her face because she dropped a fork. As the crimson liquid dripped down her white dress, her husband did not jump up to defend her. Instead, he laughed and said, "Thanks, Dad. Maybe that will finally teach her some respect for quality things." I felt the oak armrest of my chair crack under my grip. I stood up without saying a word, walked out to the porch, and made one single phone call. By the time dessert was served, they had no idea they were already homeless. My name is Harlan Blackwood. I am 72 years old, and this is how I destroyed an entire dynasty in 45 minutes. Before I continue this story, please like and subscribe to the channel if you have ever had to stand up for a loved one against bullies. Let me know in the comments where you are listening from. The dining room inside the Covington estate was colder than the November wind biting at the windows outside. It was not a matter of temperature, because the fireplace was roaring with logs that probably cost more than my entire wardrobe, but it was a coldness of spirit. The air was thick with the smell of roasted turkey sage stuffing and the suffocating stench of old money that had gone rotten. I sat at the far end of the mahogany table trying to make myself as small as a man of my size could. I wore my best flannel shirt, the one with the least amount of oil stains, and a pair of dark jeans that I had ironed specifically for this occasion. To the people sitting around this table, I was just Harlan the grease monkey, the failed mechanic who lived in a trailer park and drove a rusted Ford truck that sounded like a dying tractor. They tolerated my presence only because it was Thanksgiving and it would look bad to the neighbors if they left the poor-in-law out in the cold. My daughter Maya sat across from me. She looked thin, too thin. Her eyes were darting around the table, scanning the moods of the people surrounding her like a soldier in a minefield. She was wearing a simple white dress she had bought at a discount store. I knew she had bought it because she wanted to look like she belonged here, like she fit into this world of crystal goblets and silver platters. But against the backdrop of the Covingtons' opulence, she just looked fragile. Her husband Trent sat next to her, but there was a mile of emotional distance between them. Trent was busy checking his phone, scrolling through emails, and occasionally letting out a heavy sigh, as if being present at a holiday dinner was a burden he physically struggled to carry. At the head of the table sat Alistair Covington. He was a man who took up too much space. His face was flushed red from the 3 glasses of expensive Cabernet he had already consumed, and his eyes were glassy and mean. He was currently holding court, telling a story about how he had fired his gardener for planting the wrong shade of begonias. His wife Patricia sat to his right, nodding along with a tight smile, her neck weighed down by a diamond necklace that could have paid off my daughter's student loans twice over. I kept my head down, cutting my turkey into small, precise squares. I had promised Maya I would behave. I had promised her I would endure their insults, their passive-aggressive comments, and their condescension for one night. Just one night, Dad, she had begged me, her voice trembling over the phone. Please, just for the holiday. I want everything to be peaceful. So I ate my dry turkey, and I kept my mouth shut, even when Alistair made a joke about how people who work with their hands never develop their brains. I swallowed the rage along with the cranberry sauce. Then it happened. It was a small sound, a tiny metallic clatter that echoed like a gunshot in the tense silence of the room. Maya reached for the salt shaker, and her hand trembled. Her fork slipped from her fingers and hit the edge of her porcelain plate before falling onto the table. It did not break anything. It did not chip the plate. It just made a noise. The conversation stopped instantly. Alistair stopped chewing. He slowly turned his heavy head toward Maya, his eyes narrowing into slits. The silence stretched out for 5 agonizing seconds. Maya froze, her hand still hovering in the air, her face draining of color. I am so sorry, she whispered, her voice barely audible. It slipped. Alistair stared at her. He did not blink. He picked up his wine glass, the crystal catching the light from the chandelier. It was full of a deep, dark red vintage that he had bragged about for 20 minutes before we started eating. Chateau Margaux, he had called it, saying it cost $5,000 a bottle. "You are clumsy," Alistair said, his voice low and dangerous. "You have always been clumsy, haven't you, Maya? It must be genetic." Maya lowered her eyes. "I am sorry, Alistair. I will be more careful." "Careful?" Alistair scoffed. He took a sip of the wine, swishing it around in his mouth before swallowing. "You think an apology fixes the disruption. You think saying sorry changes the fact that you have no appreciation for the environment you are in. Do you know how much this table setting costs? Do you have any concept of value?" I gripped my knife tighter. My knuckles were turning white. I looked at Trent, expecting him to say something, expecting him to put a hand on his father's arm and say, "Hey, Dad, it was just a fork, let it go." But Trent did not look up from his phone. He was typing a message, a smirk playing on his lips. Alistair stood up. He swayed slightly, steadying himself with one hand on the table. With the other hand, he held the wine glass. He looked at the white tablecloth, then he looked at Maya's white dress. "You know what the problem is?" he slurred. "The problem is that you do not respect what you have not earned. You grew up in filth, so you treat luxury like filth. You need a lesson, a visual lesson." Before my brain could fully process what was happening, Alistair pulled his arm back and threw the contents of his glass directly at my daughter. It happened in slow motion. The dark red liquid arced through the air like a wave of blood. It splashed across Maya's face, blinding her momentarily. It soaked into the bodice of her white dress, spreading rapidly like a gunshot wound. It dripped from her chin onto her hands and onto the pristine tablecloth. Maya gasped, a sound of pure shock and humiliation. She sat there frozen, the wine dripping from her eyelashes, tears instantly mixing with the alcohol on her cheeks. The room was dead silent. I could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. I could hear my own heart hammering against my ribs, a drumbeat of war. Then the laughter started. It wasn't Alistair. It was Trent. My son-in-law, the man who had vowed to protect my daughter, chuckled. He looked up from his phone, saw his wife covered in red wine, looking like a victim of a crime, and he laughed. "Thanks, Dad," Trent said, shaking his head as if entertained. "Maybe that will finally teach her some respect. She is always breaking things. You should see our apartment. She ruins everything she touches. Maybe now she will learn to be careful." I looked at him. I looked at this man, this boy really in his expensive Italian suit, and I felt a darkness rise up inside me that I had not felt in 30 years. He was laughing at her pain. He was enjoying her humiliation. Patricia, the matriarch, let out a sigh of annoyance. She did not look at Maya with concern. She looked at the tablecloth. "Great Alistair," she snapped, but her anger was directed at the situation, not the action. "Now the linen is ruined. That stain is never going to come out." She turned her cold gaze to Maya. "Well, don't just sit there dripping on the floor. Get up. Go to the kitchen and clean yourself up. And take the tablecloth with you. Soak it in cold water immediately. Honestly, you are ruining the entire aesthetic of the dinner." Maya stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. She was shaking violently now. She wiped her eyes, smearing the red wine across her face, making her look bruised. She didn't look at me. She couldn't. She was too ashamed. She grabbed her plate and the tablecloth, trying to gather them up, her movements jerky and terrified. "I am sorry," she sobbed. "I am so sorry." She turned and ran toward the kitchen, the sound of her weeping trailing behind her. I sat there alone at the table with 3 monsters. Alistair sat back down, looking satisfied, as if he had just disciplined an unruly dog. He poured himself another glass of wine from the decanter. Trent went back to his phone, still chuckling to himself. Patricia signaled for the server she had hired for the evening to bring fresh napkins. Nobody looked at me. To them, I was furniture. I was the old mechanic in the corner, a spectator to their power, a witness who didn't matter because I had no voice and no money. Or so they thought. My hands were shaking, but not from fear. They were shaking from the effort it took not to walk over there and wrap my hands around Alistair's throat. I looked at the knife in my hand. It was a steak knife, sharp and heavy. It would be so easy. It would be so justified. But I took a breath. A long, deep breath that rattled in my chest. Violence was the tool of the desperate. Violence was what a mechanic would use. But I wasn't just a mechanic. Not anymore. Not for a long time. I set the knife down. I placed my napkin on the table. "Excuse me," I said. My voice was rough gravel and smoke, but it was steady. Alistair looked at me, his lip curling in a sneer. "What is it, old man? You going to cry too? Or are you going to go help your daughter scrub the floor? That is what you people are good at, right? Cleaning up messes." Trent didn't even look up. He just waved a hand dismissively. "Go on, Harlan. Go comfort her. Tell her to stop crying, it is embarrassing." I stood up. I felt the height of my frame, the broad shoulders that had carried heavy loads for decades. I looked Alistair dead in the eye. "I am going to step out for a smoke," I said. Alistair laughed, a barking sound. "Yeah, you do that. Go smoke your cheap cigarettes outside. Don't do it on the porch. I don't want the smell getting on the cushions. Go down by the driveway where the help parks." I turned my back on them. I walked out of the dining room through the foyer, with its marble floors and crystal chandelier, and out the heavy oak front door. The night air was freezing. It bit at my exposed skin, but it felt good. It felt clean. I walked past the porch cushions, past the manicured hedges, and down the long winding driveway. I reached my old Ford truck, the paint peeling, and the bumper held on by wire. I leaned against the cold metal of the hood. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a phone. It wasn't the cracked smartphone I used to text Maya. It was a simple black flip phone, a burner that I kept for emergencies, for situations that required a different kind of solution. I opened it and dialed a number I knew by heart. It rang once. "Yes, sir," a voice answered immediately. Crisp, professional alert. It was Weiss. "Weiss," I said. "I am at the Covington estate." "I hope the dinner is pleasant," Sir Weiss replied, though he knew me well enough to hear the edge in my voice. "It is not pleasant," I said, looking back at the house where the golden light spilled from the windows, hiding the rot inside. "Activate the sunset clause." There was a brief pause on the other end of the line. "The sunset clause, sir. That is the nuclear option. That will trigger immediate asset freezing and a recall on all outstanding leverage. It will effectively bankrupt Covington Enterprises within the hour." "Are you certain?" I looked at the window of the kitchen. I could see a silhouette moving frantically, probably Maya scrubbing a piece of cloth while her mother-in-law shouted orders. I saw the silhouette of Trent in the dining room raising a glass in a toast with his father. I thought about the wine dripping down my daughter's face. I thought about the laughter. I thought about the years of insults, the way they made her feel small, the way they treated her like a servant in her own marriage. "They threw wine at her, Weiss," I said, my voice low. "They laughed at her, understood," Sir Weiss said, his tone shifting from advisor to executioner. "The timeline." "Now," I said, "I want their credit cards to bounce before they serve the pumpkin pie. I want the foreclosure notice in their inbox before the coffee is brewed. I want them to feel the ground open up beneath them while they are still sitting in those chairs." "Consider it done," Weiss said. "And Trent? Trent works for a subsidiary that we acquired silently 3 months ago, does he not?" I asked. "Yes, sir. He is the regional sales director." "Fire him," I said. "For cause. Embezzlement. Incompetence." "I don't care. Just make sure he doesn't have a job or a company car by the time he walks out of that door. And cut his severance. It will be done immediately." "Anything else, sir?" "Yes," I said, looking at the sprawling mansion. "Buy the debt on this house. I know Alistair is leveraged to the hilt. Buy the note from the bank. I want to own the roof over their heads. I will have the paperwork executed in 10 minutes. Enjoy your dinner, sir." I closed the phone and slipped it back into my pocket. I stood there for a moment, in the cold, listening to the wind rustling through the dead leaves. I took a deep breath of the freezing air, letting it cool the fire in my veins. They thought I was Harlan the mechanic. They thought I was a poor old man who fixed radiators and changed oil for cash. They didn't know about the patent I sold in 1992. They didn't know about the investment firm I built quietly in the shadows, using shell companies and proxies, because I wanted to protect my daughter from the very kind of people she had married into. They didn't know that Blackwood Holdings, the private equity firm that practically owned half the commercial real estate in this state, was named after my mother. I wiped a speck of dust off my flannel shirt. I straightened my collar. Then I turned around and walked back toward the house. The walk back felt different. The gravel crunching under my work boots sounded like a countdown. I wasn't just walking back to a dinner. I was walking back to a crime scene where I was about to drop the guillotine. I opened the front door and stepped back into the warmth. The smell of the turkey was still there, but now it smelled like a last meal. I walked back into the dining room. Alistair was pouring more wine. Trent was laughing at something on his phone. Patricia was complaining about the draft. "You were gone a long time, Harlan," Alistair sneered, not even looking at me. "Get lost on the driveway. It is a big property. Try not to get confused." I sat back down in my chair. I picked up my fork. "No," I said, my voice calm. "I just had to make a call." "A call?" Trent scoffed. "To who? Your bookie? Or did one of your customers break down on the highway?" "Something like that," I said. I looked at Maya, who had returned from the kitchen. Her eyes were red and puffy, and her dress was stained pink, but she sat there trying to be brave. I looked at her and I smiled a small, reassuring smile. "Eat your dinner, sweetheart," I told her gently. "It is going to be a very interesting night." She looked at me, confused by my calmness. But she picked up her fork. Alistair raised his glass. "To family," he bellowed, his face shining with grease and arrogance, "and to knowing your place in the world." I raised my water glass. "To knowing your place," I repeated. We drank, and as the crystal touched my lips, I saw Alistair's phone light up on the table. A notification, then another, then a phone call. "It begins." The wind on the porch was not just cold, it was biting a physical assault that matched the violence churning in my gut. I stood there for a moment with my back to the heavy oak door, letting the frigid air sting my cheeks. My hands were shaking. I looked down at them, my knuckles scarred from 40 years of turning wrenches and busting knuckles on engine blocks. They were shaking not because I was frail and not because I was afraid. They were shaking because the adrenaline flooding my system was demanding release. I wanted to go back inside and tear that dining room apart with my bare hands. I wanted to flip that mahogany table and shatter every piece of crystal in that house. But that was the old Harlan. That was the Harlan who solved problems with a tire iron. The man I had become, the man who built an empire from the shadows, had far more dangerous weapons at his disposal. I reached into the inner pocket of my worn flannel jacket. The fabric was thin and fraying a costume I had worn so well for so long that sometimes even I forgot what was underneath. My fingers closed around the cold plastic of the burner phone. It was a cheap, disposable device, the kind drug dealers and paranoid billionaires use. I flipped it open. The screen glowed with a harsh blue light in the darkness, illuminating the steam rising from my breath. There was only one number saved in the contacts. I pressed send and brought the device to my ear, staring out at the manicured lawn of the Covington estate. It looked peaceful under the moonlight, a lie wrapped in expensive landscaping. Weiss answered on the first ring. There was no greeting, no pleasantries. Weiss was a machine in a three-piece suit. A man I paid an obscene amount of money to be available 24 hours a day for exactly this kind of moment. "I am listening," Sir Weiss said, his voice crisp and clear, cutting through the static of the wind. "It is time, Weiss," I said. My voice sounded foreign to my own ears, devoid of the warmth I usually reserved for my friends. It was the voice of the chairman. "Activate the sunset clause on the Covington portfolio." There was a pause on the other end, a heavy silence that lasted 3 seconds. I knew what Weiss was doing. He was sitting in his glass-walled office in Chicago, probably tapping a pen against his desk, calculating the blast radius. "The sunset clause," Sir Weiss asked, his tone carefully neutral. "You are aware that this is a scorched earth protocol. It will not just freeze their assets. It will trigger immediate repayment demands on all outstanding commercial and personal loans. We hold the paper on 80% of Alistair Covington's debt. If we call it in tonight, he will be insolvent by sunrise." "Do it," I said, watching a shadow move across the window of the dining room behind me. "I want a total asset freeze. I want his business accounts locked. I want his personal accounts flagged for suspicious activity. I want his credit cards to decline if he tries to buy a pack of gum." "Understood." "And the timeline?" "Immediate," I snapped. "I want the notifications hitting his phone before I finish my dessert. And Weiss, I want you to exercise the lien on this property. The estate. I know he refinanced it last year to cover his gambling losses in Macau. We bought that note 3 months ago, didn't we?" "We did, sir. It is a high-risk mortgage. We have the right to foreclose upon any sign of financial instability." "Then consider this instability," I said. "Initiate foreclosure. I want the sheriff involved. I want an eviction notice ready to be served tonight." "Very good, sir. Very good. The foreclosure team is on standby. Now regarding the subsidiary." I took a deep breath. This was the part that would hurt the most. This was the part that would draw blood from my own flesh. "Trent Covington," I said, saying his name, leaving a foul taste in my mouth. "He is currently employed as the regional sales director for North Stream Logistics." "Correct. Which is a shell company wholly owned by Blackwood Holdings. He has been embezzling Weiss. I know he has. I have seen the new car. I have seen the mistress he has stashed in the city. I want a full internal audit triggered instantly. Flag his expense accounts, lock him out of the company server, and fire him." "Termination for cause," Weiss clarified. "For cause for gross misconduct for breathing the wrong way." "I do not care," I growled. "Just make sure that when he wakes up tomorrow, he is not just unemployed, he is unemployable. I want his severance package zeroed out. I want his company leased vehicle repossessed. It will be done." I lowered the phone slightly, my hand trembling again. I looked through the window. I could see the back of Maya's head. She was sitting so still, her shoulders slumped in defeat. She looked so small. My little girl. I had spent her entire life trying to shield her from the hardness of the world. I had hidden my wealth because I wanted her to find a man who loved her for her heart, not her inheritance. I wanted her to build a life of her own. Instead, my silence had led her into a trap. It had led her to a man who saw her as a servant, and a family that saw her as a punching bag. "Weiss," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper. "Sir, if we do this, if we burn it all down, Maya gets burned too. She lives in their world. She relies on Trent's income. If I destroy him, I am destroying her stability." There was a moment of silence, then Weiss spoke with a softness I rarely heard. "Sir, you are not destroying her stability. You are removing the illusion of it. She is standing on a trapdoor. You are simply opening it so you can catch her before she falls too far. Sometimes you have to break the bone to reset it properly." I closed my eyes. He was right. But God, it hurt. It hurt to know that the next few hours would be the most painful of her life. She would see her husband humiliated. She would see her home lost. She would see the chaos, and she would be terrified. But she needed to see it. She needed to see them for what they were. Weak, fraudulent, cruel. She needed to see that the power they held over her was smoke and mirrors funded by debt and delusion. She needed to see that her father, the grease monkey in the flannel shirt, was the one holding the hammer. "Do it," I said, letting the cold air fill my lungs one last time. "Burn it all down, Weiss. Leave nothing but ash." "Executing now, sir." "Goodbye." The line went dead. I snapped the phone shut and slipped it back into my pocket. The wind howled around the corner of the house, rattling the expensive copper gutters. I stood there for another minute, composing myself. I smoothed down my gray hair. I adjusted the collar of my cheap jacket. I had to go back in there. I had to sit in that chair and eat their food. I had to watch the clock tick down. I had to watch the smiles wipe off their faces one by one. I turned toward the door. My reflection caught in the glass pane. I didn't look like a billionaire. I didn't look like the CEO of a private equity firm that moved markets with a whisper. I looked like an old, tired man. Good, I thought. Let them underestimate me for 10 more minutes. I reached for the brass handle. It was cold under my fingers. I pushed the door open and stepped out of the biting wind and back into the suffocating warmth of the lion's den. The sound of their laughter drifted from the dining room. They were still joking, still drinking, still celebrating their cruelty. Enjoy it, I thought, as I walked down the hallway, my boots heavy on the marble floor. Enjoy the wine, Alistair. It cost you everything. The heavy oak door clicked shut behind me, sealing the silence of the night outside and trapping me once again in the suffocating warmth of the dining room. The air was thick with the scent of roasted meat and expensive perfume, a combination that suddenly smelled like decay. I walked back to my seat, my work boots heavy on the Persian rug, making a dull, thudding sound that seemed to annoy Patricia. She wrinkled her nose as I passed her chair, as if I had brought the smell of the trailer park in with me. I sat down slowly, deliberately, taking my time to adjust the napkin on my lap. I looked at the three of them. Alistair flushed, and loud Trent scrolling on his phone with a bored expression, and Patricia inspecting her manicure. They looked like royalty, secure in their castle, unaware that the foundation had just been turned to dust. Alistair was the first to speak, of course. He swirled the wine in his glass, the liquid clinging to the crystal like blood. "Back from the wilderness." "Are we, Harlan?" He sneered, his voice dripping with condescension. "I was worried you might have gotten confused by the driveway lights. It can be overwhelming for someone used to street lamps and gravel roads." I did not answer him. I simply picked up my knife and fork and cut a small piece of the turkey that had gone cold on my plate. My silence seemed to irritate him. He wanted a fight. He wanted me to beg or scream so he could exert his dominance. My calm was a variable he had not calculated. Trent finally looked up from his phone. He chuckled, a low, nasty sound. "Leave him alone, Dad. He probably just went out to check if his truck was still there. You know how it is in his neighborhood. If you leave something unattended for 5 minutes, it grows legs and walks away. He is just being cautious. Old habits die hard, right, Harlan?" I chewed the meat slowly. It was dry. For all their money, they couldn't cook a bird properly. I swallowed and took a sip of water. My eyes flicked to the grandfather clock in the corner. 7 minutes had passed since I hung up with Weiss. The digital tendrils of Blackwood Holdings were currently wrapping around the Covington accounts, squeezing the life out of them, but the pain hadn't registered yet. It was like a man who has been cut by a razor so sharp he doesn't realize he is bleeding until he sees the red pool on the floor. I looked across the table at Maya. She had returned from the kitchen, but she looked like a ghost. Her face was scrubbed raw where she had tried to wash off the wine, but the stain on her dress was vivid, a jagged pink scar across her chest. She was staring at her plate, her hands folded in her lap, trembling slightly. She hadn't touched her food. She looked small, defeated, and utterly alone. Patricia noticed Maya's lack of appetite. She set down her fork with a sharp clatter that made Maya jump. Patricia said, her voice sharp and cutting like broken glass. "Why aren't you eating?" Maya flinched. "I am not hungry, Patricia. My stomach is a little upset." Patricia scoffed, rolling her eyes toward the ceiling, as if asking for patience. "Upset. You are upset because you were clumsy and suffered the consequences. That is no reason to be rude. Do you know how much this meal cost? We hired a private chef from the city to prepare this. To sit there and pick at it is an insult to our hospitality." "It is fine," Mom Trent said dismissively, not looking at his wife. "She is always dramatic. Let her sulk." "No," Alistair boomed, slamming his hand on the table. The silverware jumped. "No, I will not have it. This is Thanksgiving. We are a family and we will eat together like a civilized family." He turned his glare on Maya, his face purple with rage and alcohol. "Pick up your fork, Maya." Maya looked at him, her eyes wide with fear. "Please, Alistair, I really can't." "Eat," Alistair roared, pointing a thick finger at her plate. "I paid $50 a pound for that bird. You are going to show some gratitude. You come into my house, you drink my wine, you wear the clothes my son pays for, and you think you can sit there and disrespect my table. Eat the food." I saw Maya's hand shake as she reached for her fork. She looked at Trent, begging him with her eyes to intervene, to say something, anything, to stop his father's bullying. But Trent just swirled his drink, looking bored. "Do what he says, babe," Trent said, his voice flat. "Just eat a few bites so he calms down. You know how he gets when he feels disrespected. Don't make a scene. Don't make a scene." The irony was so thick I could taste it. Alistair had thrown wine in her face, but Maya was the one making a scene by not having an appetite. This was their dynamic. This was the hell my daughter had lived in for 3 years. They broke her down piece by piece and then blamed her for being broken. Maya cut a piece of turkey. Her hand was shaking so badly, the fork rattled against the china. She lifted it to her lips. I could see her throat working, trying to swallow back the sob that was threatening to escape. She put the food in her mouth and chewed mechanically, tears leaking from the corners of her eyes and sliding down her cheeks. "There," Alistair said, leaning back in his chair, satisfied. "Was that so hard?" "It is about discipline, Maya. You need discipline. That is your problem. You were raised without standards." He looked at me, his eyes gleaming with malice. "No offense, Harlan, but you can't give what you don't have. You raised a weak girl because you are a weak man. A man who settles for a trailer and a toolbox can't teach a child how to survive in the real world." I continued to eat. I cut another piece of turkey. I put it in my mouth. I chewed. I swallowed. I did not look at him. I looked at the clock. 12 minutes. My silence was driving him insane. He wanted me to explode. He wanted me to validate his superiority by engaging in a shouting match he knew he would win because he had the house and the money. By doing nothing, I was denying him his victory. "You are quiet tonight," Harlan Trent piped up, sensing his father's irritation. "Cat got your tongue? Or are you just overwhelmed by the setting? I know it is a lot to take in. Real silver crystal glasses. Try not to pocket any of the spoons on your way out, okay? We count them." Patricia let out a tittering laugh. "Oh, stop it, Trent. Don't be cruel. He can't help his circumstances. Though I do wish you would talk to him about that truck. It is an eyesore in the driveway. The neighbors will think we are having the plumbing fixed." I set my knife and fork down. I placed them parallel on the plate in the European style, precisely as my mother had taught me 50 years ago. I wiped my mouth with the linen napkin and placed it on the table. "The truck runs fine," I said, my voice calm and level, filling the room. "It gets me where I need to go." Alistair snorted. "Where you need to go? And where is that Harlan? The junkyard? The pawn shop?" He laughed at his own joke, looking around the table for approval. Patricia smiled. Trent chuckled. Maya looked down at her plate, a tear dropping silently onto the white meat of the turkey. I looked at Alistair. I looked at the sweat beading on his forehead. I looked at the vein throbbing in his neck. I looked at him not as a man, but as an asset, a distressed asset that was currently being liquidated. "I go where the work is," I said simply. "Work," Alistair mocked. "You call that work, tinkering with scrap metal? You are a relic, Harlan, a dinosaur. The world belongs to men of vision, men of capital, men like me." He gestured around the room, encompassing the expensive furniture, the art on the walls, the very air we breathed. "This is what success looks like. This is what power looks like. You wouldn't understand. You are just a spectator." I leaned back in my chair. The wood creaked slightly. I crossed my arms over my chest. "You are right, Alistair," I said softly. "I am just a spectator." I watched him pour another glass of wine. He spilled a little on the table, but nobody said a word. He was the king, and the king could spill whatever he wanted. Trent leaned toward Maya, his voice dropping to a hiss that was meant to be private, but carried clearly in the silent room. "Stop crying. You are embarrassing me. Look at your father. He is sitting there taking it like a dog. Why can't you be more like him? Just sit there and shut up." Maya flinched away from him. She looked at me, her eyes filled with a desperate plea. "Daddy, can we go?" she whispered. "Please. I want to go home." Trent grabbed her wrist under the table. I saw her wince. "You are not going anywhere," he hissed. "We are leaving when my father says we are leaving. You are going to sit here, and you are going to eat that dessert, and you are going to smile. Do you understand me?" I watched his hand on her wrist. I memorized the position of his fingers. I calculated the pressure he was applying. I added it to the ledger. The bill was getting higher by the second. Alistair clapped his hands. "Dessert." "Patricia," he announced. "Ring the bell. I want the pumpkin pie. And open the port. The vintage 68. I want to celebrate." "Celebrate what, Dad?" Trent asked, releasing Maya's wrist and putting on his sycophantic smile. "Celebrate us," Alistair declared, raising his arms. "Celebrate the fact that we are winners. The market is up, our stocks are soaring, and we are the kings of this county. Nothing can touch us." Just as the words left his mouth, a sound cut through the room. It wasn't the bell for the servant. It was a digital chirp, a standard generic ringtone. It was Alistair's phone sitting on the table next to his wine glass. The screen lit up, buzzing against the mahogany. Alistair frowned, annoyed at the interruption of his speech. He glanced at the screen. "It is Bob," he muttered, his brow furrowing. "The bank manager. Why is he calling me on Thanksgiving?" He picked up the phone. I watched him. I watched the arrogance on his face, the sneer of a man who believes the world exists to serve him. "Answer it, Alistair," I thought. "Answer it and let the music begin." He swiped the screen and brought the phone to his ear. "Bob," he barked, his voice loud and authoritative. "This better be good. I'm in the middle of dinner." I watched his eyes. For a second they were annoyed. Then they were confused. And then, in the span of a single heartbeat, they went wide with a fear so pure it was almost beautiful. What he whispered, the color draining from his face faster than the wine had drained from the bottle. "What do you mean, frozen?" Alistair waved his hand dismissively at the table, signaling us to keep eating, while he stomped toward the French doors, his voice rising in agitation as he argued with the bank manager. I watched him go, knowing exactly what he was hearing. He was hearing the sound of a guillotine blade dropping on his neck. But the man sitting next to my daughter was too absorbed in his own reflection to notice the executioner standing in the room. Trent cleared his throat loudly, reclaiming the attention of the table. He did not seem bothered by his father's sudden distress. In Trent's world, problems were things that happened to other people. He adjusted his silk tie and leaned back in his chair, offering his mother a charming smile that looked practiced, because it was. Ignore him, Mom, Trent said, smoothing his napkin over his lap. You know how the bank gets with international transfers. Probably just a security flag on the Cayman accounts. Dad will sort it out in 5 minutes. He always does. Patricia sighed, picking at her salad. It is just so disruptive, she complained. I told him not to do business on a holiday. It ruins the mood. Trent chuckled and reached for the wine bottle, pouring himself another glass, despite the tension thick enough to choke on. Well, while he deals with that, I have some news of my own. Big news. I didn't want to say anything until the ink was dry, but seeing as we are all here celebrating success, I might as well share. He paused for effect, looking around the table. His eyes slid over me as if I were a stain on the wallpaper before settling on his mother. I am closing the Southside deal next week. Trent announced, his chest puffing out. Patricia clapped her hands together lightly, the diamonds on her fingers flashing under the chandelier. Oh, Trent, that is wonderful. Is that the development project you told me about? The one near the river? The very same, Trent said, grinning. We are bulldozing that entire stretch of rot. You know that old trailer park down by the old mill? The one where all the transients and the lowlifes live. We finally got the zoning permits approved. We are going to clear them out before Christmas. I felt a muscle in my jaw jump. I knew that trailer park. I lived in that trailer park. I knew the people there. Old Mrs. Higgins, who baked bread for the neighbors. Tom, the retired veteran who fixed bicycles for the kids. They weren't lowlifes. They were people who had been chewed up by the economy men like Alistair Covington created. And Trent was talking about destroying their homes like he was discussing taking out the trash. It is going to be magnificent. Trent continued, oblivious to the fact that the man sitting across from him was one of the people he planned to evict. Luxury condos, Mom. High-end retail. A marina. We are talking about a $200 million valuation. And the best part is my commission on the land acquisition alone is going to put me in a different tax bracket. I am finally going to buy that Porsche I have been eyeing. I looked at Maya. She was staring at her hands, her face pale. She knew the truth. She knew there was no commission. She knew there was no deal. She knew because she was the one balancing the books in the dark while he slept. That sounds very impressive, Trent, I said quietly, slicing a piece of potato. It sounds like you are making quite a fortune. Trent sneered at me. It is called ambition, Harlan. You should try it sometime. But I suppose it is hard to have vision when you spend your life under the hood of a '96 pickup truck. I chewed slowly, swallowing the insult. So with all this money coming in, I assume you will be paying off the credit cards soon, and perhaps catching up on the rent for your apartment. The table went silent. Trent's face flushed a deep, ugly red. Patricia stopped eating her fork, hovering halfway to her mouth. Excuse me, Trent snapped. What do you know about my finances, old man? I know enough, I said, looking him dead in the eye. I know that Maya works double shifts at the diner on weekends. I know she cleans houses on Tuesdays and Thursdays. I know she comes home with her hands raw from scrubbing floors so that you can drive a leased BMW to a job where you spend half the day playing golf. Trent slammed his wine glass down, wine sloshing over the rim. You listen to me, you senile old fool. Maya works because she wants to. She likes to keep busy. It gives her spending money for her little hobbies. I pay the bills in this family. Me. I carry the weight, liar. The word hung in the air, spoken not by me, but by the silence of my daughter. She didn't say it out loud, but her posture screamed it. She shrank into her chair, terrified of the explosion she knew was coming. Patricia looked at Maya with a mixture of pity and disgust. Is that true, Maya? Are you cleaning houses? Like a maid? Maya opened her mouth to speak, but Trent cut her off. She helps a few friends organize their homes, Mom. It is not like she is a maid. God. Harlan, why do you always have to make everything sound so sordid? You are just jealous. You are jealous that my father built a dynasty and you built a shed. He turned to Maya, his eyes narrowing. And speaking of money, we need to talk about your budget. I was looking at the statements yesterday. You are bleeding us dry, Maya. Maya looked up, startled. What? Trent, I haven't bought anything in months. Don't lie to me, Trent hissed. I saw the transfer. $200. You sent $200 to him. He pointed a finger at me like it was a weapon. $200 a month. Do you know how much that adds up to over a year? That is $2,400, Maya. That is a vacation. That is a mortgage payment. And you are throwing it away on charity for your father because he is too lazy to get a real job. I felt a cold fire spreading through my chest. That $200 was not charity. It was the only money Maya managed to save from her tips, hiding it from Trent so that I would have money for groceries. She thought I needed it. She thought I was poor. Every month when that envelope arrived, I put the money into a savings account in her name. I never spent a dime of it. But the fact that she sent it, that she sacrificed her own needs to make sure her daddy didn't starve, broke my heart all over again. It is my money, Trent. Maya whispered, her voice trembling. I earned it. It is our money, Trent shouted, slamming his hand on the table again. When you married me, your debt became my debt, and your money became my money. That is how it works, and I am forbidding it. Do you hear me? No more handouts to the mechanic. If he can't feed himself, he can go to a soup kitchen. Patricia nodded in agreement, taking a sip of her wine. Trent is right, dear. Enabling him only hurts him. You have to cut the cord. $200 is a lot of money to just give away. Imagine what you could do with that if you invested it in your appearance. Maybe then you wouldn't look so tired. Tired. My daughter looked tired because she was carrying the weight of a grown man on her back. She looked tired because she was paying off gambling debts that Trent thought he had hidden. I knew about the poker games in the back of the cigar lounge downtown. I knew about the bookie in Jersey who called Trent 3 times a week. I knew that the Southside deal was a fantasy Trent had concocted to borrow more money from his father to cover his losses. I looked at Trent. I looked at the gold watch on his wrist, a fake Rolex he bought to impress his friends. I looked at the soft hands that had never done a day of hard labor in their life. You are a small man, Trent, I said, my voice cutting through the noise of the room. Trent laughed, a high-pitched, nervous sound. And you are a broke man, Harlan. I know which one I would rather be. I am going to be running this city one day. And you know what? When I close the Southside deal, the first thing I am going to do is tow that piece of junk truck of yours out of my driveway and have it crushed into a cube. Maybe I will sit as a paperweight. Just then, the French doors banged open. Alistair marched back into the room. He looked deranged. His hair was disheveled, his face a mask of sweat and panic. He wasn't the arrogant king anymore. He was a cornered animal. It is a mistake, he muttered, pacing around the head of the table. It has to be a mistake. A system error. Bob said the accounts are frozen. All of them. The business accounts, the personal accounts, even the offshore trusts. He says there is a hold, a federal hold. Patricia dropped her fork. It clattered loudly against the china. What do you mean, frozen, Alistair? I have to pay the caterer. I have a spa appointment tomorrow. What is going on? I don't know, Alistair roared, turning on her. Stop asking me stupid questions. I am trying to fix it. It is probably just a glitch, a hacker or something. I am calling the lawyers. He looked at me, his eyes wild. And what are you looking at, Harlan? Enjoying this? Probably never had more than $50 in the bank, so you don't know what it is like to deal with real finance. This is high-level stuff. Complicated. Way above your pay grade. I picked up my glass of water and took a slow sip. My eyes moved to the grandfather clock. 22 minutes. Weiss was efficient. The dominoes were falling exactly as planned. It sounds stressful, Alistair, I said calmly. Perhaps you should check your email. Sometimes banks send notifications. Alistair sneered at me. I don't need tech advice from a man who still uses a flip phone. Go back to your eating. Actually, don't. You have eaten enough of my food. Get out. He pointed to the door. Get out of my house, Harlan. I am sick of looking at you. I am sick of your flannel and your boots and your pathetic, sad face. You bring down the property value just by sitting here. Take your daughter and get out. We have family matters to discuss. Maya stood up immediately, eager to leave. Come on, Dad, she whispered, grabbing my arm. Let's go, please. Trent grabbed her other arm, yanking her back down into the chair. Sit down, he commanded. He told him to leave, not you. You stay right here. You are going to help Mom clean up this mess. And then we are going to upstairs, and you are going to explain to me exactly how much money you have been hiding from me. If there is 200 for him, there is 200 for me. I watched him handle her. I watched his fingers dig into her arm. I saw the flinch. That was it. The line had been crossed miles ago, but now we were in new territory. I looked at Trent. Let go of her, I said. Trent laughed. Or what, Harlan? What are you going to do? Fix my carburetor? I stood up. I didn't stand up like an old man. I stood up like a mountain rising from the sea. I placed my hands on the table and leaned forward. I am going to give you 10 seconds to let go of my daughter, I said, my voice dropping an octave. And then I am going to teach you the difference between net worth and self-worth. Alistair stepped between us, his face purple. Don't you dare threaten my son in my house. You are nothing, Harlan. You are a grease monkey. A nobody. You fix cars for a living. I build skylines. I could buy and sell you 1,000 times over before breakfast. I looked at Alistair. Then I looked at Trent. Then I looked at Patricia clutching her pearls. You think you know who I am, I said quietly. You see the clothes. You see the truck. You see the silence. And you think you see a victim. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the burner phone. I set it on the table next to the wine glass Alistair had used to assault my daughter. But you didn't look close enough, I continued. You didn't ask why the mechanic knows so much about corporate law. You didn't ask why the grease monkey never complains about the cost of parts. You didn't ask whose name is on the deed of the land you are standing on. Trent frowned, confusion flickering in his eyes. What are you talking about? I looked at the phone. It vibrated. A text message from Weiss. Done. I smiled. It was a cold smile. A smile that didn't reach my eyes. I am not talking about cars, Trent. I am talking about North Stream Logistics, your employer. Trent froze. How do you know where I work? I know where you work, I said, because I own it. The room went dead silent. The kind of silence that happens after a bomb goes off, but before the building collapses. What did you say? Trent whispered. I said I own it. North Stream Logistics is a subsidiary of Blackwood Holdings. Blackwood Holdings acquired it 3 months ago. And do you know who the majority shareholder of Blackwood Holdings is? I tapped my chest lightly. You are looking at him. Alistair burst out laughing. It was a desperate, hysterical laugh. You own a holding company. Please, you can't even afford a haircut. This is pathetic, Harlan, even for you. Check your phone, Trent, I said, ignoring Alistair. Check your work email. I believe HR just sent out a notification. Trent hesitated. He looked at me, then he looked at his phone. His hands were shaking. He swiped the screen. He tapped the icon. I watched the color drain from his face. It was like watching a painter whitewash a wall. He went gray, then white, then a sickly shade of green. No, he murmured. No, this isn't real. Read it, I commanded. Read it out loud. Trent looked up, his eyes wide with terror. It says notice of immediate termination. Effective immediately. Reason: gross misconduct and embezzlement. Embezzlement! Patricia shrieked. My son is not a thief. He is, I said. And he is not a very good one. He left a paper trail a mile wide. The lease on the BMW, the apartment in the city for the girl named Chloe, the gambling debts paid from the company expense account. It is all there, Trent. Every dime. Trent dropped the phone. It clattered onto the table. He looked at me, and for the first time I saw him truly see me. He didn't see the mechanic anymore. He saw the predator. Who are you? He whispered. I picked up the wine bottle Chateau Margaux. I poured a small amount into my glass. I swirled it, just like Alistair had done. I am the man who just fired you, I said, taking a sip. And I am the man who just bought your debt, Alistair. Alistair stopped laughing. He stared at me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish on a dock. My debt, he croaked. Every penny, I said. The mortgage on this house, the business loans, the lines of credit. The bank was very happy to offload such a toxic portfolio. They sold it to me at a discount, actually. I should thank you. I leaned forward, my eyes locking onto Alistair's. You have 30 minutes to vacate the premises, Alistair. This is my house now, and I have a strict policy about tenants who throw wine at my daughter. Eviction starts now. The silence in the room following my declaration was absolute, but it was the silence of a held breath, not a surrender. Alistair stared at me, his face a map of broken capillaries and confusion, but the arrogance that had been bred into his bones for 3 generations would not let him accept reality just yet. To him, I was still the mechanic in the flannel shirt. The idea that I held the deed to his kingdom was simply too absurd, too violating of the natural order of his universe to be true. He blinked, his eyes glassy and wet, and then a terrible, jagged smile cut across his face. You are lying, he whispered, his voice trembling with a mixture of rage and desperate hope. You are a senile old liar. You bought my debt. With what? Spare change you found under the seats of your customers' cars. This is a joke, a sick, pathetic joke. He fumbled for his phone again, his fingers thick and clumsy. I watched him with the detachment of a coroner examining a corpse that hasn't quite stopped twitching. He was dialing Bob, the bank manager, again. He needed a voice from his world, a voice from the country club set, to tell him that everything was fine, that the system still worked for men like him and against men like me. I am going to put this on speaker, Alistair announced, his voice rising to a shout, as he looked around the table seeking an audience for my humiliation. I want you all to hear this. I want you to hear Bob laugh when I tell him this grease monkey claims to own my mortgage. He pressed the button and threw the phone onto the mahogany table. The line rang. Once, twice. The sound was shrill and violent in the quiet room. Alistair Harlan put the phone on the table. It sounded like a gavel. Bob Alistair barked the moment the line connected. Do not give me any more excuses about glitches. I have a lunatic in my dining room claiming he bought the Covington portfolio. Tell him he is crazy. Tell him who I am. There was a pause on the other end of the line. A heavy, static-filled silence that felt like the air fire before a tornado touches down. When Bob spoke, his voice was not the deferential tone of a service provider speaking to a wealthy client. It was the flat, cold tone of a man reading a legal script, a man who knew he was being recorded. Mr. Covington, the voice crackled through the speaker. I was about to call you back. We have received formal notice from the note holder. Alistair looked at me triumphantly. See? He sneered. Formal notice. Tell him, Bob. Tell him who holds the note. Blackwood Holdings, Bob said. Alistair froze. The name hung in the air. He knew the name. Everyone in the state knew the name. Blackwood Holdings was the shark that swam in the deep water, the firm that acquired distressed industrial assets and turned them into gold mines. But he did not make the connection. Not yet. Exactly, Alistair said, though his confidence wavered slightly. Blackwood, an institutional firm. Not this man. Not Harlan Blackwood. Sir Bob interrupted, his voice cutting through Alistair's bluster. The foreclosure proceedings have been accelerated due to the activation of the cross-default clauses in your business loans. When your commercial lines of credit were frozen 30 minutes ago, it triggered an automatic default on your personal assets. It is a domino effect, Mr. Covington. Alistair leaned over the table, screaming at the phone, now spit flying from his lips. Stop saying default, Bob. I have assets. I have liquidity. Transfer the funds from the Cayman Trust. Cover the margin. Do your job. I cannot do that, Sir Bob replied, and for the first time I heard a trace of pity in his voice. The Cayman accounts were flagged by the SEC 5 minutes ago. We received a federal freeze order. We cannot move a penny. And Mr. Covington, your credit cards. The system is showing a total rejection. Alistair turned pale. A sickly gray color that started at his neck and worked its way up to his hairline. He looked at Patricia, who was clutching her pearl necklace as if it were a life preserver. He looked at Trent, who was still staring at his own phone in shock at his firing. Finally, he looked at me. This is a mistake, Alistair whispered to the phone. I will sue. I will sue the bank. I will sue Blackwood. I will burn you all to the ground. You have no standing to sue, Sir Bob said softly. And frankly, Mr. Covington, you currently have no funds to retain counsel. The firm has exercised its right to offset. We have seized the balances in your checking and savings accounts to cover the overdrafts on your business lines. Your balance is currently negative $400,000. Negative. The word seemed to suck the oxygen out of the room. Alistair Covington, the man who had thrown $5,000 wine at my daughter because she dropped a fork, was broke. Not just cash poor, not just illiquid. He was in the hole deep enough to bury him standing up. I am ending this call now, Sir Bob said. Please do not come to the branch tomorrow. Security has been notified to deny you entry until the federal investigation is resolved. Good luck, the line went dead. The silence that followed was heavy, crushing. Alistair stared at the phone as if it had turned into a snake. He poked it with a trembling finger, hoping to wake it up, hoping to hear Bob say it was all a prank. But the screen remained dark. He looked up. His eyes met mine. For a second, I saw the man he wanted to be the titan of industry. But then that image shattered, and all that was left was a frightened bully who had lost his stick. He tried to salvage it. He tried to pull the shreds of his dignity around him like a robe. He straightened his spine and cleared his throat. He looked at Patricia and forced a smile that looked more like a rictus of pain. Banking error, he said, his voice cracking. Clearly, a massive administrative failure. Computers. You know how they are. He waved a hand dismissively, but the hand was shaking so badly he knocked over his water glass. The water spread across the table, soaking into the expensive linens joining the wine stain. He stared at it, unable to move. I will sort it out in the morning, he muttered to no one in particular. I will go down there and heads will roll. Yes, heads will roll. He stood up, but his legs wouldn't support him. He stumbled, catching himself on the back of his chair. The chair tipped over and crashed to the floor with a deafening bang. Alistair didn't even look at it. He just stood there, swaying slightly, a man adrift in his own dining room. Patricia let out a small whimper. Alistair, she whispered. The cards. The accounts. How are we going to pay the staff? How are we going to live? Alistair rounded on her, his face twisting into a snarl. Shut up, Patricia. Just shut up. I am handling it. It is a glitch. Do not look at me like that. He turned to me. His eyes were wild, desperate. You, he hissed. You think you are smart. You think you did this. You are nobody. You are a mechanic. You fix trucks. You don't take down empires. I picked up my napkin and dabbed my mouth. I stood up, slowly unfolding my frame until I towered over the table. I fix broken things, Alistair, I said calmly. And sometimes when something is too broken to fix, you have to scrap it. You have to crush it down to raw metal and melt it away so you can build something decent in its place. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a single crisp dollar bill. I placed it on the table right next to his phone. Here, I said. Alistair looked at the money, confused. What is this? Seed capital, I said. Start over. Try to build something honest this time. Alistair looked at the dollar, then at me. His face went purple. He lunged across the table, grabbing for my throat. But he was slow drunk and broken. I simply stepped back. He crashed onto the table, sending china and crystal shattering to the floor. He lay there amidst the wreckage of his Thanksgiving feast, gasping for air, sobbing dry, heaving breaths. Trent didn't move to help him. Patricia didn't move. They just watched, paralyzed by the sudden, violent end of their world. I looked at Maya. She was staring at me with wide, knowing eyes. She finally saw me. Not the dad who changed oil, but the dad who changed destiny. Get your coat, baby, I said gently. We are leaving. But the night wasn't over. As Alistair lay on the table weeping into the gravy boat, the front doorbell rang. It was a long, insistent chime. Patricia looked toward the hallway, her face pale. Who could that be? She whispered. I checked my watch. The timing was perfect. I believe I said, buttoning my flannel jacket, that is the rest of your bad karma coming home to roost. Trent finally looked up from his stupor. What do you mean? I pointed toward the hallway. Why don't you go answer it, Trent? I believe this visitor is for you. The dining room had become a pressure cooker of denial. Alistair stood by the ruins of his chair, his chest heaving, his face a mask of sweaty desperation as he tried to mentally rewrite the conversation he had just had with the bank. He looked at us, his eyes darting from Patricia to Trent to me, silently begging us to believe the lie he was about to tell. It was a glitch, he had said. A banking error. The kind of thing that happens to titans of industry, whose assets are simply too vast for the computers to comprehend. He smoothed his disheveled hair with a trembling hand and forced a laugh that sounded like a dry cough. Bring the port, he barked at the catering manager, who had been standing discreetly in the corner, witnessing the slow disintegration of the evening. The 1968. Open it now. We need to toast to resilience, to weathering the storm. The manager, a tall man with impeccable posture named Henri, stepped forward. He held a bottle of dusty dark glass in one hand and a small wireless payment terminal in the other. He cleared his throat, a sound that cut through Alistair's bluster like a knife. Sir Henry said, his voice low and apologetic but firm. Regarding the vintage port, as per our contract for premium add-ons opened on site, I require a swipe for the additional $2,000 before I can uncork it. Alistair stared at him as if he had asked for a kidney. He looked insulted. He looked furious. But underneath the rage, I saw the flicker of absolute terror. He knew his accounts were frozen. He knew that card in his wallet was nothing more than a piece of plastic. Patricia let out a huff of indignation. Honestly, she snapped. Do you not know who we are? You are asking Alistair Covington for payment up front like he is ordering a pizza. Just open the bottle. We will settle the bill at the end of the night with the rest of the catering fees. I am afraid I cannot do that, Madame Henri said, not backing down. The agency policy is strict regarding vintage spirits. Immediate authorization is required. Patricia rolled her eyes and reached for her purse, which sat on the floor by her feet. It was a Birkin bag that cost more than my truck. She dug through it, her manicured nails clicking against the leather. until she produced a heavy black card. The Centurion. The card that was supposed to open any door in the world. "Use mine," she said, thrusting it at Henri with a look of supreme boredom. "Alistair is busy dealing with the incompetence of his bank. I will handle the wine. Just get it done and stop bothering us." Henri nodded, bowing his head slightly. He took the card. He inserted it into the chip reader. The room went silent. We all watched the small machine. I watched the little screen light up. I knew exactly what it was doing. It was reaching out to the digital fortress Weiss had constructed around their assets. It was knocking on a door that had been welded shut. The machine beeped. A harsh, dissonant tone that sounded incredibly loud in the quiet room. Henri frowned. He looked at the screen. He pulled the card out and wiped the chip on his sleeve, then inserted it again. "What is the problem?" Patricia asked, tapping her fingers on the tablecloth. "Is the machine broken? You really should update your equipment if you are going to cater to high-net-worth clients." The machine beeped again. Nasty. Final. Henri looked up, his face carefully neutral. "I am sorry, madam. The card has been declined." Patricia laughed. It was a sharp, incredulous sound. "Don't be ridiculous. That is an Amex Centurion. It doesn't have a limit. It cannot be declined. You are doing it wrong. The readout says, 'Do not honor.'" Madame Henri said, handing the card back to her as if it were contaminated. "It suggests you contact the issuer immediately." Patricia snatched the card back, her face flushing a deep pink. "This is absurd. First Alistair's bank, now this. It is a system-wide failure. The network must be down." I sat there quietly watching the panic begin to spread like a virus. It wasn't the network. The network was working perfectly. It was the Covington network that had been severed. Trent let out a groan of frustration. He stood up, adjusting his suit jacket. His arrogance was the only thing holding him upright. "Give it to me, Mom," he said, stepping forward. "God, you two are helpless with technology. It is probably a security flag because you bought that jewelry in Paris last week." He reached into his back pocket and pulled out a sleek leather wallet. He flipped it open, revealing a row of cards that looked like a rainbow of debt. Platinum, gold, sapphire. He pulled out a heavy metal card, the corporate card for North Stream Logistics. "Here," Trent said, handing it to Henri with a sneer. "Put it on the company expense. We will write it off as a client entertainment cost. Just open the damn wine." I took a sip of my water. Trent didn't know yet. He didn't know that 5 minutes ago Weiss had flagged that specific card for immediate revocation. He didn't know he was trying to spend money that belonged to me. Henri took the card. He inserted it. The silence stretched out again. Maya was looking at Trent, her eyes wide. She knew. She knew they lived on credit. She knew they floated payments from one card to pay the minimum on another. She was watching the house of cards tremble in the wind. "Beep." "Declined," Henri said flatly. "The code indicates the account has been closed by the administrator." "Closed," Trent repeated the word, feeling heavy in his mouth. "That is impossible. I am the administrator. I am the regional director. Nobody closes my account." "Try it again," he demanded. Henri tried it again. "Beep." "Declined." Trent snatched the card back, his hands starting to shake. "This is garbage. This machine is garbage." He pulled out another card. "A personal visa." "Try this one." Henri swiped it. "Beep." "Declined. Insufficient funds." Trent's face went white. He started pulling cards out of his wallet faster now, throwing them at Henri like he was dealing a deck of cards. "This one. MasterCard." "Beep." "Declined." "This one. Discover." "Beep." "Declined." "This one. It is a gas card, for God's sake, it has to work. Beep. Declined. The pile of plastic on the serving tray grew, a monument to Trent's failure, a graveyard of credit lines. Every single one of them hit the wall I had built. Weiss had done a thorough job. He hadn't just frozen the big accounts. He had found every liability, every line of credit, every financial tendril attached to the Covington name, and he had severed them all. Trent stood there, his wallet empty, his breath coming in short, shallow gasps. He looked at the machine as if it were a bomb. He looked at Henri, who was staring back with a mixture of pity and professional disdain. "There is something wrong with your Wi-Fi," Trent stammered. "That is it. Your signal is bad. You are in a dead zone." "My signal is full," Sir Henry said softly. "And the transaction for the previous bottle went through 30 minutes ago perfectly fine. The issue is not the machine, sir. The issue is you." He didn't say it, but we all heard it. Alistair was leaning against the sideboard, breathing heavily. Patricia was frantically checking her banking app on her phone, tapping the screen with manic intensity. "It won't load," she whispered. "I can't log in. It says access denied. User suspended. Contact branch. Alistair, what is happening?" Alistair didn't answer. He was staring at me. I looked back at him. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just watched. I wanted him to feel the weight of it. I wanted him to feel the absolute powerlessness of being a man whose worth is tied entirely to a number on a screen, a number that can be deleted by a man he deemed beneath him. "This is humiliation," Trent shouted, suddenly sweeping the pile of declined cards onto the floor. They skittered across the hardwood like beetles. "You are trying to embarrass us. I am going to report you. I am going to have your company fired." Henri stepped back, his face hardening. "Sir, I think it is best if I pack up the service. The outstanding balance for the evening is $4,500. If you cannot provide a valid form of payment, I will have to call the police to file a report for theft of services." Police. The word hung in the air. The Covingtons didn't deal with the police. They dealt with lawyers. They dealt with golf buddies who were judges. The police were for people like me. Trent looked at his father. "Dad, do something. Pay him. Write a check." Alistair looked at the floor. He knew a check would bounce so high it would hit the moon. He was trapped. For the first time in his life, Alistair Covington was completely and utterly broke. I cleared my throat. The sound was soft, but in that silent room it sounded like thunder. "It seems there is a liquidity problem," I said, my voice calm. Trent spun around, his eyes wild. "Shut up, Harlan. Just shut up. You don't know what is happening. This is a glitch, a cyber attack. Someone hacked us." Or I said, leaning forward slightly, "Perhaps you just ran out of road. You see, Trent, that is the problem with living on borrowed money." Eventually, the lender calls the note. I reached into my back pocket. I pulled out an old, worn leather wallet. It was cracked at the seams and shaped to the curve of my hip. I opened it. There were no platinum cards inside, no black cards. Just a few crisp $100 bills and a debit card from a local credit union. I pulled out $500. I placed the bills on the table. "Here," I said to Henri. "This should cover the tip for you and your staff. You have been very patient." Henri looked at the money, then at me. "Thank you, sir." I stood up and walked over to where Trent was standing amidst his scattered credit cards. I looked down at him. "You tried to buy respect, Trent," I said. "You tried to buy it with cars you didn't own and money you didn't earn, and now you can't even buy a bottle of wine." I looked at Maya. She was staring at the credit cards on the floor, the plastic symbols of the cage she'd been living in. I saw the realization dawning in her eyes. The cage wasn't made of steel. It was made of debt and lies, and the door was wide open. Trent looked at me, his face twisting with a mixture of fear and hatred. "Who are you?" he whispered again, just like he had before. "Who are you really?" "I am the man who pays his bills, Trent," I said. "And yours just came due." Just then the lights in the dining room flickered. Once, twice, and then the entire house plunged into darkness. The power Patricia shrieked in the dark. I smiled in the shadows. Weiss. He was thorough. He must have bought the utility debt, too. "Happy Thanksgiving," I whispered into the dark. The darkness that swallowed the dining room was absolute and heavy, the kind of blackness that feels like it has weight. For a few seconds, the only sounds were the ragged breathing of the Covington family and the frantic clicking of Patricia's fingernails against the screen of her useless phone. Then the flashlights started to flick on one by one. Beams of harsh white light cut through the gloom, swinging wildly, creating distorted shadows that danced against the silk wallpaper like ghosts. In the strobe effect of the waving phones, Alistair looked less like a titan of industry and more like a frightened old man trapped in a collapsing mine. Patricia was the first to break the silence, her voice shrill and trembling in the dark. "The generator," she shrieked. "Why hasn't the backup generator kicked in? We paid $40,000 for that system, Alistair. It is supposed to be automatic." Alistair was fumbling with his own phone, trying to direct the light toward the breaker panel in the hallway, but his hands were shaking too badly. "It is the fuel service," he muttered, more to himself than to us. "I forgot to pay the renewal fee for the propane delivery. I thought I had another month." I sat in the dark, calm and still. I didn't turn on a light. I didn't need to. I knew exactly where everyone was. I knew exactly what was happening. Weiss had been thorough. When you buy the debt of a property, you don't just own the mortgage, you own the leverage to cut the utilities if the accounts are in default. It was petty, perhaps, but after watching wine drip from my daughter's chin, petty felt like justice. Then, in the chaos of the shadows, a sound cut through the panic. It was the cheerful, upbeat chime of an email notification. Ding! It came from Trent's phone. In the darkness, the screen lit up his face with a ghostly blue glow. He was staring at it, his eyes wide and unblinking. The expression on his face wasn't confusion anymore. It was the look of a man watching a car crash. In slow motion, knowing he is in the driver's seat. Trent, Patricia called out, waving her flashlight beam toward him, blinding him momentarily. "Who is that? Is it the bank? Did they fix the cards?" "Tell me they fixed the cards, Trent. I cannot deal with this humidity without the air conditioning." Trent didn't answer. He didn't blink. He just stared at the screen, his thumb hovering over the glass. Trent, Alistair barked, turning his own light onto his son. "Answer your mother." "What is it?" "It is work," Trent whispered. His voice was hollow, stripped of all its usual arrogance. "It is a priority notification from Human Resources and the legal department." "Open it," Alistair commanded. "Maybe it is a bonus. Maybe the commission came through early. We can use that cash to float the accounts until morning." "Open it." Trent tapped the screen. I watched him from the shadows. I watched his eyes scan the text left to right, top to bottom. I watched his jaw go slack. I watched the phone slip slightly in his sweaty grip. "Read it," I said from the dark. My voice startled them. They had forgotten I was there. I was just part of the furniture again, invisible in the gloom. Trent looked up blindly into the dark, trying to find me. It says, "Notice of immediate termination with cause." Patricia let out a gasp. "Termination? You mean fired?" "They cannot fire you. You are the regional director. You are indispensable." "Keep reading, Trent," I said. "Why?" Trent swallowed hard. His voice shook as he read from the tiny glowing screen. "Effective immediately, your employment with North Stream Logistics is terminated. This action follows an emergency internal audit triggered by the acquisition of our parent company. Acquisition? Alistair interrupted, his brow furrowing in the harsh light of the phone. Who acquired North Stream? They were stable. They weren't on the market. Trent scrolled down. Blackwood Holdings, he read. The name hit the room like a physical blow. Alistair froze. Even in the dim light, I could see the recognition dawn on his face. He knew the name. In the world of high finance and aggressive acquisitions, Blackwood Holdings was a legend. It was a phantom entity known for swallowing distressed companies, stripping them of their rot, and rebuilding them with ruthless efficiency. It was a name that made men like Alistair nervous because Blackwood didn't play golf and didn't attend charity galas. Blackwood just won. Blackwood. Alistair whispered, reverence and fear mixing in his tone. They are sharks. Absolute killers. They bought North Stream when... How did I miss that in the journals? Trent ignored him, reading the rest of the email, his voice rising in panic. The audit has revealed significant irregularities in your expense accounts, including unauthorized vehicle leases, personal travel expenses flagged as client development, and undocumented cash withdrawals. As such, the company is exercising its right to withhold all severance and accrued bonuses pending a criminal investigation. Criminal investigation, Patricia wailed, clutching Alistair's arm. Trent, tell them it is a lie. Tell them you are innocent. Trent looked at his father. Dad, they are taking the car. The email says the repossession order for the BMW has already been dispatched. And the apartment. The company lease on the penthouse. They are evicting Chloe. Tonight. Who is Chloe? Patricia asked, confused. Is she your assistant? Trent didn't answer. He dropped into his chair, the phone clattering onto the table. He put his head in his hands. It is over, he moaned. It is all over. They know everything. They have the receipts, Dad. They listed them. The jewelry store. The casino in Atlantic City. They know about the bookie. Alistair stared at his son with a mixture of horror and realization. He didn't care about the morality of the theft. He cared that Trent had been caught. He cared that the safety net he thought he had, the son he thought was his legacy, was just as bankrupt and fraudulent as he was. Blackwood Holdings. Alistair muttered, pacing the room, his flashlight swinging wildly. Why would they target a logistics firm? They usually go for manufacturing or real estate. This doesn't make sense, unless they are consolidating the sector. He stopped and looked at me. His light blinded me for a second, before he turned it away, dismissing me again. You don't understand what this means, Harlan, he said, his voice trembling. You think losing a job at a garage is bad. This is a corporate execution. Blackwood Holdings doesn't just fire people. They salt the earth. If they flagged Trent for embezzlement, he will never work in this industry again. His name is Mud. He is finished. I took a sip of my water in the dark. I knew exactly what it meant. I had written the policy. It sounds very thorough, I said calmly. This Blackwood group seems to know exactly where to look. Almost as if they had inside information. They are monsters, Alistair spat. Faceless, soulless monsters. I have heard stories about the chairman. Nobody knows who he is. He never gives interviews. He never shows his face. They say he runs the empire from a bunker. He destroys families for sport, Harlan. For sport. And now he has come for my son. The irony was delicious, intoxicating. Alistair Covington. The man who threw wine at my daughter. The man who built his life on debt and pretension was standing there calling me a monster. He was calling the man sitting 5 feet away from him a faceless destroyer. He had no idea that the monster was wearing a flannel shirt and eating his dry turkey. Maybe, I said, leaning forward slightly into the light. He just hates thieves, Alistair. Maybe he just believes that people should pay for what they take. Trent lifted his head. His face was wet with tears and sweat. "It is not theft," he shouted, his voice cracking. "It was creative accounting. Everyone does it. I was going to pay it back as soon as the Southside deal closed. I just needed time. They didn't give me time. They just cut my throat." He looked at Maya, who was sitting silently in the dark, watching her husband crumble. "Maya, you have to help me," he begged. "You have some savings, right? That money you send to your dad. We need it. We need to hire a lawyer, a defense attorney. If Blackwood goes to the police, I am going to prison." Maya looked at him. In the shadows, her eyes were dark pools. She looked at the man who had laughed when wine was thrown in her face. She looked at the man who had forbidden her to help me. "I don't have any money, Trent," she said softly. "You told me it was our money, remember? And you spent it all on Chloe." Trent flinched as if she had slapped him. "Don't start with that now. Chloe is nothing. She is just stress relief. You are my wife. You are supposed to stand by me." "Stand by you," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "Like you stood by her when your father assaulted her. Like you stood by her when you mocked her poverty." Trent spun toward me, his flashlight blinding me again. "Shut up, old man. You don't get to speak. You are enjoying this, aren't you? You are happy that we are ruined. But guess what? If I go down, Maya goes down too. She is my wife. Her name is on the joint tax returns. If the IRS comes for me, they come for her." I smiled in the dark. He really didn't know who he was dealing with. Weiss had already separated Maya's liability. The tax returns Trent signed were fraudulent, but the ones Weiss had filed on Maya's behalf, quietly and separately for the last 3 years, were impeccable. "I wouldn't worry about Maya," I said. "She has better representation than you do." "What representation?" Alistair sneered. "You. What are you going to do, fix the prosecutor's car in exchange for leniency?" Just then, another ping echoed in the room. This time it was Alistair's phone, then Patricia's, then Trent's again. A chorus of digital doom. Alistair looked at his screen. "It is the security company," he whispered. "They are canceling the contract, effective immediately. They are pulling the gate guards." Patricia looked at hers. "It is the country club. They revoked our membership for conduct unbecoming and financial insolvency." Trent looked at his. "It is the landlord for the penthouse. He is changing the locks. Right now." Chloe is on the street. The darkness of the room seemed to press in closer. They were being erased. Piece by piece, account by account, membership by membership, their identity was being stripped away. They were no longer the Covingtons of Highgarden Estate. They were just 3 people in the dark with no money, no jobs, and no friends. "Who is doing this?" Alistair screamed, throwing his phone against the wall. It shattered, leaving a dent in the plaster. "This isn't a glitch. This is a hit. Someone is targeting us. Who do we have enemies like this? We don't know anyone with this kind of reach." I stood up slowly. My knees cracked audibly in the silence. I picked up the wine bottle from the table. It was heavy, cool to the touch. "You have lived a life of creating enemies, Alistair," I said, walking around the table until I stood behind Maya's chair. "You treat people like dirt. You steal, you lie, you bully. Did you really think you would never come across a wolf who was bigger than you?" Alistair turned his flashlight on me. The beam shook in his hand. "And what would you know about wolves, Harlan?" he spat. "You are a sheep, a poor, pathetic sheep." I placed a hand on Maya's shoulder. She reached up and touched my hand, her fingers cold. "Sheep get slaughtered, Alistair," I said. "Wolves wait." Suddenly a loud banging on the front door echoed through the house. It wasn't a polite knock. It was the heavy, authoritative pounding of wood on wood, the sound of the law. Patricia shrieked. "Who is that?" "Don't answer it." "It doesn't matter if you answer it," I said, looking toward the hallway. "They have keys. Or rather, they have battering rams." I looked down at Trent, who was shivering in his chair. "I believe I said that is the sound of your severance package arriving." The front door burst open with a crash that shook the floorboards. Heavy boots thundered into the foyer. Flashlight beams brighter and stronger than the phones cut through the darkness of the hallway, sweeping into the dining room. Police voices shouted, "Make yourself known." Alistair looked at me, his eyes wide with terror. "Blackwood," he whispered. "It is Blackwood." I leaned down close to his ear. "Yes," I whispered back. "It is." The police officers did not arrest anyone immediately. They simply filled the foyer with their imposing presence, a wall of blue uniforms and tactical lights that pushed the darkness back into the corners. They were the physical manifestation of the end of the Covington era. But before they could even read Alistair his rights or put cuffs on Trent, a high-pitched screaming cut through the heavy silence of the house coming from the front lawn. It was a woman's voice, shrill with panic and entitlement, the sound of a person who has never been told no, crashing headfirst into a reality where yes is no longer an option. One of the officers at the door stepped aside, and a figure burst into the dining room like a hurricane in high heels. It was a young woman, maybe 25 years old, dripping wet from the sudden rain that had started outside. Her blonde hair was plastered to her skull, and her mascara was running down her cheeks in black rivulets, making her look like a terrifying raccoon. She was wearing a coat that I recognized immediately from the expense reports Weiss had sent me. It was a Burberry trench coat worth $3,000. Underneath, she wore a tight dress that did nothing to hide the prominent swell of her belly. She was pregnant heavily, so maybe 5 or 6 months along. Chloe Trent gasped, his voice barely a whisper, his face draining of what little color it had left. The woman ignored everyone else in the room. She ignored the police. She ignored the spilled wine and the overturned chair. She locked her eyes on Trent and lunged at him, her hands curled into claws. "You liar!" she screamed, hitting him in the chest with her fists. "You told me it was handled. You told me the lease was in your name. They locked me out, Trent." The doorman put my bags on the sidewalk in the rain. He said the company canceled the contract. He said I was trespassing. Where am I supposed to go? Trent tried to catch her wrists, trying to shush her, his eyes darting frantically to Maya, who was sitting frozen in her chair. "Chloe, stop it," he hissed, struggling with the hysterical woman. "Not here. Not now. Please, you have to leave." "No, I will not leave," she shrieked, pushing him away. "You promised me the penthouse. You promised me we were going to Paris for the baby moon." My credit card was declined at the Uber. I had to pay cash. "Do you know how humiliating that is?" "Fix it, Trent. Fix it right now, or I swear to God I will burn your life to the ground." The room was spinning in a vortex of chaos, but I stood in the center of it perfectly still. I looked at Maya. She wasn't looking at Chloe. She was looking at Trent. Her eyes were wide and vacant, like windows in an empty house. She was processing the image in front of her. The coat, the belly, the familiarity with which this woman touched her husband. The way Trent wasn't denying her presence, he was just trying to manage it. Maya stood up slowly. Her legs were shaking so bad she had to hold onto the table for support. Her knuckles were white against the dark wood. "Who is she?" Maya asked. Her voice was quiet, hardly more than a breath, but it cut through Chloe's screaming like a razor blade. Trent froze. He looked at his wife, then at his mistress, then back at his wife. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He was a rat caught in a trap of his own making, and there was no way to chew his leg off this time. Chloe stopped hitting him and turned to look at Maya. She looked her up and down, her eyes raking over Maya's cheap, stained dress, with a look of pure, unadulterated contempt. It was the same look Patricia gave the help. Oh, you must be the wife, Chloe said with a sneer. The boring one. The one who counts coupons and cleans the house. Trent told me about you. He said you were pathetic, but wow, he really wasn't kidding. Look at you. You look like a drowned rat. Maya flinched as if she had been slapped. Shut up, Chloe, Trent shouted, pushing her behind him. Don't talk to her. Oh, now you protect her. Chloe laughed a harsh, brittle sound. 5 minutes ago you were texting me saying you couldn't wait to leave this dusty museum and come back to the city. You said her father smelled like oil and her mother was a nag. You said you were only here for the inheritance. Well, where is it, Trent? Where is the money? Because my keycard doesn't work and my baby needs a roof. Baby. The word hung in the air, heavy and toxic. Maya looked at Chloe's stomach. She stared at the curve of it, the life growing inside the woman who was destroying her life. I knew that Maya had wanted children. I knew they had been trying for 2 years. I knew Trent had told her it wasn't the right time, that they couldn't afford it, that he was too stressed with work. And here was the work. Patricia stood up, her face a mask of horror. Trent, tell me this isn't true. Tell me this trash is lying. You wouldn't do this, not with a girl like that. Chloe spun around, her eyes blazing. Trash. You call me trash? Your son bought me this coat. Your son pays for my apartment. Your son begs me to answer his calls at 3 in the morning because he can't stand being in the same room as you people. He hates you. He hates all of you. He told me his father is a drunk and his mother is a cold-hearted witch who cares more about her pearls than her family. Alistair roared, a sound of pure animal rage. Get her out of here. Police, remove this whore from my house. The police officer closest to the door stepped forward, his hand resting on his belt. Sir, we are not your private security. And currently, this woman appears to be a victim of the same fraud investigation as your son. She stays until we get a statement. Fraud. Trent whispered, his knees buckling. I stepped forward. The floorboards creaked under my boots. I walked until I was standing right between Trent and Maya, shielding my daughter from the sight of her husband's betrayal. I pulled the burner phone out of my pocket again. It is time for the accounting, I said, my voice flat and hard. Trent looked at me, sweat pouring down his face. Don't, Harlan. Please. Not in front of her. I ignored him. I looked at Maya. Maya, look at me, I said gently. She looked up, her eyes swimming with tears. Dad, she whispered. Dad, he said he was working late. He said he was closing deals. I know, baby, I said. I know. But numbers don't lie. Men lie. Numbers tell the story. I looked at the screen of my phone, scrolling through the forensic accounting report Weiss had compiled. Item 1, I read aloud, my voice projecting to every corner of the room. The apartment. Unit 42B at the Skyline Tower. Lease signed 18 months ago. Monthly rent $8,500. Paid for by North Stream Logistics under the category of warehousing expense. Chloe gasped. You told me you owned it, she screamed at Trent. You told me you bought it for us. Item 2, I continued relentlessly. Diamond tennis bracelet. Purchased 3 months ago from Tiffany & Company, cost $12,000. Flagged in the company ledger as client gifts. Maya touched her own wrist, which was bare. She had never received jewelry from him. Not once. Item 3. Prenatal care and luxury birthing package at St. Jude's Medical Center. Deposit paid last week. $15,000. Withdrawn from the joint savings account you share with Maya, labeled as IRS tax payment. Maya let out a sound that was half sob, half scream. You stole my savings, she choked out. You told me we owed taxes. You told me we were going to lose the car if I didn't sign the transfer. I worked double shifts at the diner for that money, Trent. I scrubbed floors for that money. And you spent it on her baby. Trent tried to reach for her. Maya, listen, it is complicated. I was going to put it back. The Southside deal was going to cover everything. There was no Southside deal, Trent. I shouted, my voice booming like a cannon. There never was. It was a Ponzi scheme you were running on your own father to cover your losses. I turned the page on the digital report. Item 4. Travel. 2 weeks in Cabo San Lucas last October. Labeled as Regional Conference. Total cost for 2, including first-class flights and private villa, $22,000. Maya covered her mouth with her hand. October. You missed my birthday, she whispered. You said you were in a meeting in Detroit. You said you couldn't get a signal. You were on a beach with her. Trent looked at the floor, his resistance finally breaking. I needed a break, he muttered. You don't understand the pressure I am under, Maya. You are always so sad. You are always tired. You come home smelling like cleaning products and diner grease. It is depressing. Chloe? She is fun. She doesn't ask me about bills. She doesn't look at me with those big sad cow eyes waiting for me to fix everything. She makes me feel like a man. The cruelty of his words was breathtaking. He wasn't just admitting the affair, he was blaming Maya for it. He was telling her that her exhaustion, her sacrifice, the very work she did to support him, was the reason he sought comfort in the arms of a woman he was paying for with stolen money. Chloe looked at Trent, her face twisting. You told me she was crazy, she said. You told me she was asexual. You told me you slept in separate rooms. We do, Trent yelled. We do sleep in separate rooms because I can't stand to look at her. Look at her, Chloe. Look at that dress. Look at her hair. She is a peasant. She belongs in a trailer park with her father. I married her because I thought she would be grateful. I thought she would be a good little wife who kept the house clean and didn't ask questions. But she is just a millstone around my neck. Maya stood there taking the bullets one by one. I watched her heart break. I watched the light go out of her eyes. But then something else flickered there. A spark. A tiny ember of the rage that ran in her bloodline, the Blackwood rage. She stopped crying. She wiped her face with the back of her hand, smearing the wine and the tears to a war paint. She looked at Trent, and for the first time in years, she didn't look like a victim. She looked like a judge. You are right, Trent, she said, her voice steady and cold. I am a peasant. I work for my money. I clean up other people's messes. And do you know what I learned from cleaning houses? Trent looked at her, wary of the change in her tone. What? I learned that you can't clean something that is rotten to the core, Maya said. You just have to throw it out. She reached down to her left hand. She struggled for a moment, the ring tight on her finger. She pulled it off. It was a modest ring, a small diamond that Trent had claimed was a family heirloom, but which I knew he had bought at a pawn shop. She held it up. It caught the light of the police flashlights. You want to talk about value, she said. You want to talk about worth. This ring is a lie. This marriage is a lie. You are a lie. She threw the ring. It hit Trent in the chest and bounced off, landing in the wine glass Alistair had been drinking from with a soft plink. Keep it, Maya said. You are going to need the money for bail. Trent looked at the ring in the glass, then at Maya. You can't leave me, he said, his voice rising in panic again. You can't. I am your husband. We have a covenant. And besides, you have nowhere to go. You have no money. You have no home. Dad kicked us out. The bank took everything. You need me, Maya. I am the only one who knows how to navigate this world. I stepped forward, blocking his view of her. She doesn't need you, Trent, I said. She never did. She carried you. For 5 years, she carried you on her back while you picked her pockets. And as for navigating this world, you seem to have crashed the ship into the rocks. Chloe let out a sob, sinking to the floor in her expensive coat. What about me? She wailed. What about my baby? You can't leave us on the street. I looked down at her. I didn't feel hate for her. I felt pity. She was just another casualty of the Covington ego. Nobody is going on the street tonight, except Trent, I said. I looked at the police officer. Officer, I believe this man has confessed to embezzlement and fraud in front of multiple witnesses, and I believe there is a warrant for his arrest regarding the misappropriation of funds from North Stream Logistics. The officer nodded, stepping forward and pulling a pair of handcuffs from his belt. Trent Covington, put your hands behind your back. Trent scrambled backward, knocking over his chair. No. No, you can't do this. My father is Alistair Covington. We have lawyers. Dad, call the senator. Call someone. Alistair was sitting in the ruins of his dinner, his head in his hands. He didn't look up. He knew the senator wouldn't pick up. He knew the game was over. Dad, Trent screamed as the officer grabbed his arm and spun him around. Dad, help me! The click of the handcuffs was the loudest sound in the room. Trent began to weep, loud, ugly sobs that shook his shoulders. It wasn't the crying of a man who was sorry. It was the crying of a child who had been told playtime was over. Chloe watched him being cuffed, her face blank. She realized finally that there was no penthouse. There was no Paris. There was just a man in cuffs and a baby that would need diapers. Maya walked over to Chloe. She knelt down, ignoring the stain on her dress. She looked the mistress in the eye. He lied to you too, Maya said softly. He used us both. Chloe looked at Maya, tears welling up again. I have nowhere to go, she whispered. My parents, they don't know about the baby. They think I am a model in the city. Maya reached into her purse. She pulled out a $20 bill. It was all she had. Take a cab to the women's shelter on 4th Street, she said. Tell them Maya sent you. They will give you a bed. It is clean. It is safe. Chloe took the money, her hand shaking. Thank you, she whispered. I watched my daughter. Even in the midst of her own destruction, she was kind. She was good. She was everything these people were not. Trent was being dragged toward the door, struggling and shouting obscenities at me, at his father, at the world. You will pay for this, Harlan, he screamed. You will pay. You are nothing. You are dirt. I watched him go. Dirt is what things grow in, Trent, I said quietly. Concrete is just a tomb. The police led him out into the rain. The flashing lights painted the room in red and blue strobes. Patricia was sobbing quietly in her chair, clutching a napkin. Alistair was catatonic. I turned to Maya. Are you ready to go? I asked. She nodded, wiping her face. Yes, Dad. I am ready. But we weren't done. Not yet. There was one more card to play. One more nail in the coffin. Alistair finally looked up. His eyes were red, his face aged 10 years in 10 minutes. Why, he croaked. Why did you do this, Harlan? Why destroy everything? Just because I threw wine. Just because we were rude. You ruined generations of legacy for a stained dress. I walked over to the table. I placed my hands on the mahogany, leaning in close so only he could hear the gravel in my voice. It wasn't about the dress, Alistair, I said. It was about the 3 years you watched her scrub your floors and didn't offer her a glass of water. It was about the way you made her feel like she was lucky to be treated like a dog. It was about the fact that you broke her spirit for sport. I stood up straight. And it was about teaching you a lesson, I said. You think money is power. You think debt is leverage. You forgot the most important rule of business, Alistair. What rule? He whispered. Never leverage what you cannot afford to lose, I said. And never ever underestimate the man who knows how to take the engine apart. Because he knows exactly which wire to cut to make the whole thing stop. I took Maya's arm. We walked toward the door, leaving the Covingtons in the dark, in the ruins of their feast, surrounded by police and the ghosts of their own greed. As we stepped out onto the porch, the cold air hit us again. But this time it didn't feel biting. It felt fresh. It felt like a new beginning. My old truck was waiting in the driveway. It looked beautiful under the moonlight. Reliable, strong, paid for. Maya looked at it, then at the mansion behind us, which was now being taped off by the sheriff's deputies for foreclosure inventory. "Dad," she said, her voice small. "Where are we going to go? I don't have a home anymore." I opened the passenger door for her, helping her up into the cab. "You have a home, baby," I said, smiling for the first time that night. "You have always had a home. You just didn't know about the renovations I made." I walked around to the driver's side and climbed in. I turned the key. The engine roared to life, a deep, throaty rumble that sounded like victory. I pulled the phone out of my pocket one last time. I sent a text to Weiss. "Package secured. Proceed with the acquisition of the lake house, the one she liked when she was 12. I put the truck in gear, and we drove down the long, winding driveway, leaving the nightmare in the rearview mirror. But the payoff wasn't just the destruction of the Covingtons. The real payoff was what was waiting for Maya at the end of the road. She thought we were going to the trailer park. She didn't know we were going to the estate next to the lake, the one with the garden she had drawn pictures of when she was a child, the one I had bought 5 years ago and kept empty, waiting for the day she came back to me. I looked over at her. She was leaning her head against the cool glass, watching the trees pass by. She looked peaceful. "It is over," I said. She looked at me and smiled, a sad, tired, genuine smile. "No, Dad," she said. "I think it is just beginning." The silence left in the wake of the police sirens was heavier than the noise had been. The red and blue strobe lights that had painted the dining room walls in violent colors faded into the distance, taking Trent away to a holding cell that would be the first room he had ever slept in without Egyptian cotton sheets. Patricia sat slumped in her chair, a weeping pile of diamonds and despair, clutching a napkin stained with the wine that had started this war. She looked like a wax figure melting under heat, her face gray and sagging, her eyes fixed on the empty doorway, where her golden boy had been dragged out in handcuffs. Alistair was standing by the head of the table. He was breathing hard, his chest heaving underneath his stained dress shirt. He looked like a man who had woken up in a coffin, only to realize he had been the one to nail the lid shut. He stared at the spot where Trent had stood, his hands opening and closing into useless fists. He was trying to process the impossible sequence of events that had turned his Thanksgiving dinner into a crime scene. His son was gone. His accounts were frozen. His reputation was bleeding out on the floor. But the night was not done with him yet. There was one more card left to fall, one final piece of the foundation that had to be kicked out from under his feet. His phone rang again. The sound made Patricia jump. It echoed in the cavernous room like a fire alarm. Alistair stared at the device lying on the table amidst the wreckage of the meal. He looked at it with a mixture of terror and desperate hope. It was his personal line, the number only 5 people in the world had. He snatched it up. I saw the name flash on the screen. Sterling, his personal attorney, the man who buried bodies and hid assets, the man who charged $1,000 an hour to keep the Covington name clean. Alistair answered it instantly, pressing the phone to his ear with both hands as if it were an oxygen mask. "Sterling," he gasped, his voice cracking. "Thank God. Where have you been? The world has gone mad. The police just took Trent. They said he was embezzling. And the bank. Bob says the accounts are frozen. You have to get down here. You have to file an injunction. I want a restraining order against the bank. I want Trent out on bail immediately. Fix this, Sterling. That is what I pay you for." I watched Alistair's face. I watched the desperate hope flicker and die, replaced by a confusion that rapidly darkened into absolute horror. He stopped speaking. He listened. His mouth fell open slightly. He began to shake his head back and forth, a slow, rhythmic denial of reality. "No," he whispered. "No, you cannot be serious. That is illegal. They cannot do that. This is my home. I have rights. I have title insurance." He listened again. His knees buckled and he had to lean against the table to keep from collapsing into the spilled gravy. 30 minutes, he shrieked, his voice rising to a falsetto that sounded nothing like the booming baritone of the man who had commanded this room an hour ago. 30 minutes. It takes me 30 minutes to find my cufflinks. You cannot tell me to leave my house in 30 minutes. It is Thanksgiving, Sterling. There are laws. There is due process. I took a sip of my water. There was due process. And Alistair had ignored it when he signed the predatory lending agreements that Weiss had drafted. He had signed away his grace periods in exchange for lower interest rates, betting that he would never default. He had bet against the house and he had lost. Alistair pulled the phone away from his ear and put it on speaker, screaming at the device. "Tell them no. Tell them I will sue. Tell them I will burn the courthouse down." A voice, tinny and professional, floated out of the speaker, filling the room with the final verdict. "Alistair, listen to me closely," Sterling said. His voice was devoid of sympathy. It was the voice of a rat jumping off a sinking ship. "The note holder has exercised the accelerated foreclosure clause. It is ironclad. They obtained an emergency writ of possession from the night judge 20 minutes ago, citing flight risk and asset dissipation. The sheriff's deputies are en route to execute the order. They are 5 minutes out." "Who is the note holder?" Alistair screamed, spit flying from his lips. "Who is doing this to me?" "Blackwood Holdings," Sterling replied. "It is the same entity that froze your accounts. They own everything, Alistair. They own the mortgage, the second lien, the business loans, and the line of credit you used to buy the yacht. They called it all in. You are insolvent. Then stop them." Alistair begged, his rage turning into a pathetic whimper. "File a bankruptcy motion." Chapter 11. Anything. Buy me time. "I cannot file anything," Sterling said coldly. "My firm has withdrawn from your representation, Alistair. Your retainer check bounced an hour ago. We do not work on credit, especially not for clients who are about to be indicted." "Indicted," Alistair whispered. "The SEC has opened an inquiry into your Cayman transfers," Sterling added. "Good luck, Alistair. I would suggest you pack a bag, a small one." The line went dead. "Thutsu." Alistair dropped the phone. It didn't break this time. It just landed with a dull thud on the tablecloth, lying there like a dead insect. 30 minutes, he murmured, staring at the wall. 30 minutes. He looked up, his eyes scanning the room frantically. He looked at the crystal chandelier. He looked at the oil paintings of his ancestors on the walls. He looked at the heavy velvet drapes. He looked at the empire he had spent a lifetime building on a foundation of debt and arrogance. "They are taking my house," he said, his voice hollow. "They are kicking me out." On Thanksgiving. Patricia let out a low moan, rocking back and forth in her chair. "My clothes," she wept. "My furs. My jewelry. I cannot leave my jewelry." Alistair ignored her. He spun around in a circle, his eyes wild, hunting for an invisible enemy. "Who is doing this?" he screamed at the ceiling. "Who are you? Show yourself, you coward, you faceless coward." He ran to the window and threw open the heavy drapes, peering out into the darkness of the lawn. "Is it you?" he shouted at the night. "Is it the Russians? Is it the cartel? I paid you. I paid everyone." He turned back to the room, his chest heaving. He looked at me. For a second, his eyes locked on mine. I saw the gears turning in his head. He was looking for a culprit, a nemesis, someone powerful enough to orchestrate a synchronized demolition of his entire life in under an hour. He looked at my flannel shirt. He looked at my work boots. And he looked away. He couldn't see it. Even now, with the walls falling down around him, he couldn't conceive that the architect of his destruction was sitting right in front of him, eating the last of the dinner rolls. It simply didn't compute. In his world, power wore a suit. Power drove a Mercedes. Power didn't drive a rusted truck. It must be a takeover, he muttered, pacing the room, manic energy radiating off him. A hostile takeover. Someone wants the land. Someone wants the portfolio. They think they can squeeze me. They think I will break. He grabbed a silver candlestick from the sideboard and brandished it like a weapon. "I won't leave," he shouted. "I will not leave. This is my castle. Let them come. Let them try to drag me out. I have rights. I am Alistair Covington. I am a pillar of this community." I wiped my mouth with my napkin and stood up. The movement drew his attention again. "You are not a pillar, Alistair," I said quietly. "You are a termite. You have been eating away at the structure for years, and now the roof is coming down." Alistair pointed the candlestick at me. "You shut up," he hissed. "You get out. You and your daughter, get out before I kill you. You brought this bad luck on us. You and your poverty. It is like a disease." I walked toward him. I didn't rush. I didn't flinch at the heavy silver weapon in his hand. I walked with the steady gait of a man who has walked through fires hotter than this. "There is no such thing as luck, Alistair," I said, stopping 3 feet from him. "There is only leverage, and you are out of it." I checked my watch. "You have 24 minutes, I said. "If I were you, I would grab your medication. You are going to need it where you are going." Alistair stared at me, his arm shaking, the candlestick wavering. Confusion warred with rage in his eyes. "Why aren't you afraid?" he whispered. "Why aren't you running? The police are coming to throw us out. Why are you just standing there?" "Because I said," locking my eyes on his, "they aren't coming for me." Suddenly, the blue and red lights washed over the room again through the windows. More cars. Sheriff's vehicles this time. SUVs with push bars. The cavalry of eviction. Alistair dropped the candlestick. It clattered to the floor, denting the hardwood. He ran to the window again. He saw the deputies gathering at the gate, cutting the lock that his security company had abandoned. "No," he sobbed. "No, no, no." He turned back to the room, looking for an exit, looking for a savior. He looked at Patricia, who was useless. He looked at the empty chair where Trent had been. "Who did this?" he screamed again, tearing at his hair. "I want a name. Give me a name, Blackwood. Who is Blackwood?" I stepped into the light of the chandelier. I buttoned my jacket. I looked at Maya, who was standing by the door holding her coat, waiting for me. Then I looked back at Alistair. "You really want to know?" I asked. Alistair froze. He looked at me, really looked at me. He saw the set of my jaw. He saw the cold, hard intelligence in my eyes that I had hidden behind a mask of subservience for 5 years. He saw the predator finally dropping the camouflage. "Yes," he whispered. "Who is he?" I reached into my pocket and pulled out the burner phone. I flipped it open. I dialed a number. Alistair's phone on the table rang. He looked at it. He looked at me. He looked at the phone in my hand. "Answer it, Alistair," I said. He reached out with a trembling hand. He pressed answer. He put it to his ear, his eyes never leaving mine. "Hello," I said into my phone. My voice came out of his phone a split second later, echoing in the silent room. "I am Blackwood," I said. Alistair dropped the phone. He staggered back, clutching his chest as if I had shot him. He looked at me with a horror that transcended financial ruin. He looked at me like I was the devil himself. "You," he wheezed. "You. The mechanic." I snapped my phone shut. "The mechanic who just dismantled your life," I said. I turned to Maya. "Let's go home, daughter. The show is over." Alistair Covington stood before me, clutching his chest as if his heart were trying to claw its way out of his ribcage. His face was the color of old ash, the capillaries in his cheeks standing out like a roadmap of his ruin. He stared at the burner phone lying on the table, the device that had delivered his death sentence, and then his eyes dragged upward to meet mine. He was looking for the mechanic. He was looking for the man who fixed radiators and wiped grease on his pants. He was looking for the victim he had bullied for 5 years. But that man wasn't there anymore. I stood up. I didn't push the chair back slowly. I kicked it aside. It clattered against the wall, a violent wooden sound that made Patricia flinch. I straightened my spine, unfolding to my full height of 6'3", shedding the slump of the beaten-down blue-collar worker I had worn like a heavy coat. I rolled my shoulders back. I adjusted the collar of my flannel shirt, but I did it with the precision of a man adjusting a $3,000 tuxedo. The air in the room seemed to shift. The temperature dropped. The oxygen grew thin. "You," Alistair wheezed, his voice sounding like dry leaves skittering across pavement. "You. It cannot be you. You live in a trailer. You drive a truck that barely starts. You are nothing." I walked around the table. I moved with a predator's grace, my heavy boots silent on the expensive rug. I stopped right in front of him, invading his personal space, looming over him, until he was forced to look up at me. "I am nothing." I repeated, my voice deep and resonant, stripped of the rough country edge I had affected for years. It was the voice that had commanded boardrooms in Tokyo and London. It was the voice that had negotiated mergers that reshaped industries. "I am the nothing that just swallowed your everything, Alistair." I turned away from him, dismissing him as a threat, and walked toward the sideboard where the expensive crystal decanters sat. I ran a rough finger along the rim of a glass. "You asked who Blackwood is," I said, turning back to face the room. "You have been terrified of Blackwood Holdings for years, haven't you? You knew they were buying up the debt in this sector. You knew they were circling the water waiting for blood. You spent nights awake wondering when the shark would come." I picked up the bottle of Chateau Margaux, the same bottle Alistair had used to humiliate my daughter. It was heavy in my hand. "I founded Blackwood Holdings 30 years ago," I said calmly. "I named it after the street I grew up on. The street where my father worked himself to death in a coal mine so I could go to engineering school. I built my first patent when I was 22. I sold it when I was 24 for $12 million. And then I started buying." Patricia let out a strangled sob, her hand flying to her mouth. "$12 million, she whispered. "That was just the seed money, Patricia," I said, looking at her. "I turned that $12 million into a $1 billion portfolio of industrial assets. I own the steel mills that make the girders for your skyscrapers, Alistair. I own the shipping lines that transport your materials. I own the bank that holds your mortgage." I walked over to Maya. She was standing by the door, her coat clutched to her chest, her eyes wide with shock. She looked at me as if I were a stranger, and in a way I was. I had hidden this part of myself from her too. I had wanted her to be normal. I had wanted her to be safe from the vultures that circle around money. But I had failed. By hiding my strength, I had left her vulnerable to wolves. "I am sorry, baby," I said to her, my voice softening. "I wanted you to build your own life. I didn't want you to be a trust fund kid. I wanted you to find a man who loved you for you. But I should have told you. I should have warned you that wolves dress like sheep, but sharks dress like gentlemen." I turned back to Trent. He was still in the doorway, the police officer holding his arm. He had stopped struggling. He was listening, his mouth hanging open. "You knew," Trent whispered. "You knew the whole time." I walked toward him, stopping just out of reach of his cuffed hands. "I knew the moment you met my daughter," I said. "I had you vetted, Trent. I knew about your gambling debts before you proposed. I knew about your entitlement. But Maya loved you, and I have a rule. I do not interfere with my daughter's happiness." So I waited. I watched. I let you marry her. I paid off your bookie anonymously 3 days before the wedding so you wouldn't get your legs broken at the altar. Trent's eyes bulged. That was you. You paid Rocco. I paid everyone, I said. I bought your debt, Trent. Every time you swiped a card, every time you took a loan, I bought the paper. I own you. I have owned you for 3 years. I let you live in my world. I let you spend my money. I let you drive cars, leased from my companies, because I wanted to see if you would ever become a man. I wanted to see if you would treat my daughter with kindness. I leaned in close, my face inches from his. But you didn't, I whispered. You treated her like a servant. You cheated on her. You stole from her. And tonight you laughed when your father assaulted her. I stepped back, my disgust palpable. So I pulled the plug. I decided that my experiment was over. You are a failed investment, Trent, and Blackwood Holdings liquidates failed investments. Alistair suddenly found his voice. He lunged toward me, his hands shaking. This is entrapment, he screamed. You deceived us. You committed fraud. You pretended to be poor to trick us into what, Alistair? I asked, cutting him off. Into showing your true colors, into revealing that you are a bigot and a bully. I didn't make you throw that wine. I didn't make you scream at my daughter. I didn't make you embezzle from your own company. You did that all by yourself. I just handed you the rope. I walked back to the table. I picked up a clean wine glass. I held it up to the light, inspecting it for spots. It was pristine. I bought your mortgage 6 months ago, Alistair, I said, pouring the dark red wine into the glass. The sound of the liquid filling the bowl was the only sound in the room. I bought it through a shell company. I paid full price. The bank was happy to sell it because they knew you were missing payments. They knew you were leveraging the equity to pay for your lifestyle. I swirled the wine, letting it breathe. I bought your business loans 3 months ago, I continued. I bought the debt on your commercial properties. I bought the lease on your private jet. I bought it all. I spent $50 million acquiring every single debt obligation attached to the Covington name. Why, Alistair whispered, tears streaming down his face. Why would you do that? Because I needed leverage, I said. I knew this day would come. I knew eventually you would cross a line you couldn't uncross. And when you did, I didn't want to just sue you. I didn't want to just argue with you. I wanted the power to turn off your lights. I walked over to Maya holding the glass of wine. I wanted the power to evoke the sunset clause, I said. Do you know what that is, Alistair? It is a clause I put in all my acquisition contracts. It states that upon any act of moral turpitude or reputational damage caused by the debtor, the note holder has the right to demand immediate full repayment. I stood in front of my daughter. Throwing wine at a woman is moral turpitude, Alistair. It is assault. And it damaged the reputation of my family. So I called the note. All of it. At once. I held the glass out to Maya. Here, sweetheart, I said gently. Maya looked at the glass, then at me. Her hands were trembling. Dad, she whispered. You own everything. I own nothing, I said. Blackwood Holdings owns it. And as of this morning at 9 a.m. when I signed the transfer papers, you are the sole beneficiary of the Blackwood Family Trust. Maya gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. You own it, Maya, I said. You own this house. You own the bank that holds the note. You own the company that just fired your husband. You own the ground they are standing on. The revelation hit the room like a physical shockwave. Trent let out a sound like a wounded animal. Patricia fainted, slumping sideways in her chair, her diamonds clattering against the wood. Alistair stared at Maya, the girl he had abused, the girl he had called clumsy and weak, and he realized that she was now his landlord, his creditor, and his executioner. I placed the glass in Maya's hand. Her fingers closed around the stem. Drink it, baby, I said. It is your wine. You paid for it. Maya looked down at the dark liquid. She looked at the stain on her dress. She looked at Trent being held by the police, his face a mask of avarice and regret. She looked at Alistair, a broken king in a castle made of sand. She didn't drink it. She walked over to the table where Alistair was leaning, trying to hold himself upright. She stood in front of him. She was small and stained and exhausted, but in that moment she looked like a queen. She raised the glass. Alistair flinched, squeezing his eyes shut, expecting her to throw it in his face, expecting her to return the violence he had given her. But she didn't. She tilted the glass slowly and poured the wine onto the floor. It splashed onto the Persian rug, staining the expensive wool, a deep, permanent red. She poured until the glass was empty. "It is just wine, Alistair," she said, her voice soft, but filled with a new steel. "It isn't power. It isn't respect. It is just fermented grapes. And you traded your son and your home for it." She dropped the glass. It didn't break. It rolled across the carpet and came to a stop at his feet. "I don't want your house," she said. "I don't want your things. You can keep the memories. I am taking my father and I am leaving." She turned back to me. "Let's go, Dad." I smiled. It was the proudest moment of my life. She had the power to destroy them completely, to humiliate them as they had humiliated her, but she chose dignity. She chose to walk away. I put my arm around her shoulders. "Let's go," I said. We walked toward the door. The police officers stepped aside to let us pass. Trent lunged forward as we passed him, his face twisted with desperation. "Maya, wait," he screamed. "Baby, please." "I didn't know. I can change. We can fix this. You own the company. You can hire me back. We can be rich together. Maya, please, I love you." Maya didn't even break stride. She didn't look at him. She just kept walking her head high, her hand in mine. "He loves the money, Trent," I said over my shoulder. "He loves the trust fund. He never loved you." We stepped out into the night air. The rain had stopped, leaving the world glistening and cold. The flashing lights of the police cars and the sheriff's vehicles illuminated the driveway where the movers were already pulling up, ready to empty the house. Behind us, I heard Alistair start to scream. It was a long, incoherent howl of a man who had lost his soul and found out it wasn't worth anything on the open market. I opened the door of my truck for Maya. She climbed in. I walked around to the driver's side. I paused for a moment, looking back at the mansion. It looked smaller now. It looked like just a pile of bricks and wood. I climbed in and started the engine. The heater kicked on, blowing warm air into the cab. "Dad," Maya said, staring out the windshield. "Yeah, baby. Did you really buy the lake house?" I smiled, shifting the truck into gear. "I did. Cash. It has a garden. And a workshop for me. And a studio for you." She reached over and took my hand. Her hand was warm. "Thank you," she whispered. "Don't thank me," I said, pulling away from the curb. "Just promise me one thing. Anything. Promise me you will never let anyone make you feel small again. Not for love. Not for money. Not for peace. You are a Blackwood, Maya, and Blackwoods don't break. We build." She squeezed my hand. "I promise." We drove down the road, leaving the lights of the Covington estate behind us, fading into the darkness like a bad dream. The road ahead was dark, but for the first time in a long time I could see the stars, and they looked bright. They looked like freedom. The deadline expired with the finality of a guillotine blade dropping. The grandfather clock in the hallway began to chime, marking the hour, and as the last bell faded, the sheriff's deputies stepped forward. There was no more negotiation. There were no more pleas. The time for talking had ended, and the time for consequences had begun. I watched from the doorway as the officers laid hands on Alistair Covington. He did not go with dignity. He clung to the doorframe, his fingernails digging into the wood, screaming about his rights and his lawyers and his legacy. But the law does not care about legacy when the eviction notice is signed. They pried him loose and dragged him out into the rain, his expensive Italian loafers skidding uselessly on the marble he no longer owned. Patricia followed him, escorted by 2 officers. She wasn't screaming. She was in a catatonic state, clutching a fur coat that she had tried to grab on her way out. An officer gently but firmly took it from her hands. "It is part of the seized inventory, ma'am," he said. "You have to leave it." She looked at him with hollow eyes and walked out into the cold, shivering in her silk blouse, stripped of the last layer of her armor. Trent was already in the back of the patrol car, his face pressed against the glass, watching his inheritance disappear. The house was being sealed. Yellow tape was being stretched across the entrance. The lights were being turned off, room by room, until the great mansion was nothing more than a dark silhouette against the night sky, a tomb for a dynasty that had died of greed. Maya stood on the porch, looking at the scene. She looked at the empty driveway where her luxury car used to be. She looked at the dark windows of the room where she had spent 3 years trying to be someone she wasn't. She looked down at her left hand. The diamond on her finger caught the flashing lights of the police cruisers. It was the only thing left connecting her to this wreckage. She didn't cry. She didn't hesitate. She slid the ring off her finger. It left a pale band of skin behind a scar that would heal in the sun. She walked over to the porch railing where a half-empty glass of wine had been abandoned by one of the deputies during the chaos. She held the ring over the glass. "For the cleanup," she whispered. She dropped the ring. It splashed into the wine, sinking to the bottom with a dull clink, a golden circle drowning in red. It was a fitting end. A marriage bought with debt dissolved in the symbol of their excess. We walked to the truck. The gravel crunched under our feet, the same sound I had heard when I arrived, but now it sounded like freedom. I opened the door for her, and she climbed in. I got in the driver's seat and started the engine. The heater hummed to life. The cab was warm and smelled of old leather and oil. It smelled like reality. I put the truck in gear and pulled away. I didn't look back. There was nothing back there worth seeing, just a hollow shell and the people who had hollowed it out. Maya looked over at me. Her face was clean now, the wine washed away by the rain and her own tears. She looked tired, but she looked strong. She looked like a Blackwood. "Dad," she said softly, "do you think they will ever learn? Do you think they understand why this happened?" I kept my eyes on the road, the headlights cutting a path through the darkness. "No," I said, my voice rough and final. "They will blame the bank. They will blame the economy. They will blame me. They will never look in the mirror and see the rot. That is why we had to burn it down. You cannot cure gangrene with a bandage, Maya. You have to cut it out." She nodded, leaning her head on my shoulder. "Where are we going?" she asked. I smiled. "Forward," I said. We drove into the night, leaving the Covingtons on the curb in the rain, with nothing but their pride to keep them warm. It was a cold ending to their story, but as I watched the road ahead clear and open, I knew it was the only ending that mattered. Justice isn't about forgiveness. Justice is about balance. And finally, the scales were even. In the end, I learned that money is just a magnifying glass. It shows the world exactly who you are. For the Covingtons, it revealed rot, but for us, it revealed freedom. True power is not shouting at waiters or flashing black cards. It is the quiet confidence of knowing you can protect your own. Never mistake silence for weakness, and never judge a man by the grease on his hands. The most expensive things in life, dignity, loyalty, and love, cannot be bought, but they can be lost in a heartbeat if you forget where you came from. We are building something new now, something real. If you enjoyed watching the Covingtons get exactly what they deserved, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories of justice. Until next time.